Welcome back to Haunted Fears, Horror Family. Tonight we're diving into 11 encounters that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the world around us. These are the moments when ordinary people came face to face with something that shouldn't exist, something that defies explanation. From cornfields in Nebraska to caves deep underground, these cryptid encounters happened to real people in real places. Some survived to tell their stories. Others weren't so lucky. Before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because once you hear these accounts, you'll never look at the wilderness the same way again. Let's begin. I never believed in monsters until one stood outside my bedroom window at 3 in the morning, breathing so hard the glass fogged up. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm a fourth-generation corn farmer in rural Nebraska, about 40 miles south of Omaha. What happened on my property during harvest season last September still keeps me up at night. And I'm telling you this because I need someone else to know, just in case it comes back. It started on a Tuesday evening, September 12th to be exact. I was running the combine late, trying to get ahead of the weather forecast that predicted heavy rain for the weekend. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky that deep purple color you only see in the Midwest, when I noticed something odd in the north field. The corn there was about 8 feet tall, ready for harvest, and I saw a movement that didn't match the wind pattern. Something was pushing through the stalks in a straight line, deliberate and purposeful, heading toward the tree line that separated my property from the old Hendrickson place. I shut off the combine and climbed down, figuring it was a deer or maybe a coyote, though the movement seemed too tall for either. The evening had gone quiet in that unnatural way that makes your skin prickle, like all the insects and birds had suddenly decided to hold their breath. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, watching that line of disturbance move through my corn, and then it stopped. Just stopped dead, about 200 yards from where I was standing. I called out, thinking maybe it was someone from town playing a prank, but there was no answer. Just that heavy silence pressing down on everything. I should have left then, should have gotten back in the combine and headed home, but farming teaches you to protect your land, your investment, and I was thinking about crop damage, about liability if someone got hurt on my property. So I grabbed the flashlight from the combine's toolbox and started walking toward where I'd seen the movement. My boots crunched on the dry soil between the rows, and with each step that feeling of wrongness grew stronger. The corn around me seemed to lean away, like even the plants knew something wasn't right. When I reached the spot where the movement had stopped, I found the strangest thing. The corn stalks were bent and broken, but not in a way that made sense. They were pushed down in a perfect circle, about 15 feet across, and in the center of that circle were tracks. But calling them tracks doesn't do justice to what I saw. They looked almost human, if humans had feet that were twice as long and ended in what looked like 3 elongated toes. The impressions in the soil were deep, suggesting something heavy, and they were spaced far apart, like whatever made them had been taking massive strides. I crouched down to get a better look, and that's when I smelled it. A musky, rotten odor that reminded me of a dead animal that had been lying in the sun for days, mixed with something else, something almost chemical. It was so strong my eyes watered, and I stood up fast, suddenly aware of how exposed I was in the middle of that field, as darkness closed in around me. The flashlight beam seemed pitifully small against the wall of corn surrounding me. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound I still can't properly describe, even now. It started low, like a rumble in someone's chest, but then rose in pitch until it became this high-pitched keen that made my teeth ache. It was coming from the direction of the tree line, maybe 100 yards away, and it went on for at least 10 seconds before cutting off abruptly. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I was frozen, flashlight shaking in my hand, trying to see what had made that noise. I didn't see it then. Not clearly. but I saw something tall move between the trees, a silhouette that stood upright like a man, but with proportions that were all wrong. Too tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, with arms that hung down past where its knees should have been. It was there for just a second, and then it was gone, melting back into the shadows like it had never existed. I ran back to the combine faster than I've ever run in my life. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the engine started, and I drove that machine back to the barn like I was being chased by the devil himself. When I got home, my wife Sarah took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. I told her everything, and to her credit, she didn't laugh or tell me I was crazy. She just made me coffee and sat with me while I tried to process what I'd seen. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been nothing. A deer, a trick of the light, my imagination running wild after a long day in the fields. I drove out to the north field with Sarah, determined to prove to both of us that there was a rational explanation. The circle of broken corn was still there. The tracks were still there, even clearer in the morning light. And there was something new. Scratches on one of the wooden fence posts at the edge of the field, deep gouges in the wood that started about 7 feet up and dragged downward. Whatever had made them had claws and had used enough force to splinter the oak post like it was balsa wood. Sarah went pale when she saw them. We called the sheriff's office, and Deputy Martinez came out around noon. He took photos, measured the tracks, examined the fence post. He was professional about it. Didn't mock us or suggest we were making things up, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. He said he'd never seen anything like it, that the tracks didn't match any animal he knew, and promised to ask around, see if anyone else had reported anything strange. That night, it came closer. I was in bed, almost asleep, when Gunner started barking. Gunner's my German shepherd, and he's not a nervous dog. He scared off coyotes, chased off strangers, stood his ground, against an aggressive bull that got loose once. But the sound he was making that night wasn't his normal protective bark. It was panicked, desperate, the kind of sound an animal makes when it's genuinely afraid for its life. I got up and looked out the bedroom window, which faces the backyard, and beyond that, the cornfield. Gunner was in his run, throwing himself against the fence, trying to get back to the house, and standing at the edge of the cornfield, maybe 30 yards from my house, was the thing from the night before. I got my first real look at it under the security lights we'd installed last year, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was humanoid in the loosest sense of the word. It stood upright on 2 legs, but those legs were too long, with joints that bent in ways human legs don't. Its arms were equally elongated, hanging down almost to its knees, and at the end of each arm were hands with fingers that looked too thin and too numerous. Its body was covered in something that might have been matted fur, or might have been something else entirely, dark and patchy. But it was the head that really got me. It was roughly human-shaped, but elongated, like someone had taken a skull and stretched it vertically. I couldn't see eyes, not clearly, but I had the distinct impression it was watching the house, watching us. It stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Then, without any warning, it dropped to all fours and moved. I've never seen anything move like that, not before or since. It covered the distance to the tree line in seconds, moving in this fluid, predatory way that looked completely wrong for something that size. And then it was gone, vanished into the darkness beyond our property line. Sarah had been standing behind me, watching over my shoulder. Neither of us slept that night. We sat in the living room with all the lights on, my hunting rifle across my lap, waiting for sunrise. The next morning, I found Gunner pressed against the back wall of his dog run, shivering. There were scratch marks on the fence, made by something trying to get in, or maybe testing the strength of the chain link. The metal was bent and torn in places. That was 3 nights in. I called Deputy Martinez again, and this time I didn't care if he thought I was crazy. I told him something was stalking my property, something dangerous, and I needed help. He came out with another deputy and a wildlife officer from the Department of Natural Resources. They found the scratches on Gunner's fence. They found more tracks, fresher ones, leading from the cornfield to within 10 feet of my back door. The wildlife officer took samples, photos, measurements. He said he'd send them to the university, have some experts look at them, but he couldn't tell me what animal had made them. The fourth night is when everything changed. I'd moved Sarah and the kids to her sister's place in town, and I stayed at the house with my rifle and a plan to sit up all night if I had to. I set up in the living room again, lights off this time. Night vision scope I'd bought for deer hunting mounted on the rifle. Around 2:30 in the morning, I saw it approaching from the cornfield. It was more cautious this time, moving slowly, stopping every few feet like it was testing for danger. It circled the house once, staying just at the edge of the security light range, and I tracked it through the scope. Through the green glow of the night vision, I could see details I'd missed before. Its face, if you could call it that, had features that were almost human, but distorted. A mouth that was too wide, a nose that was little more than slits, and its eyes, when it finally looked directly at the house, reflected the light like an animal's, shining bright green in the darkness. It approached the back door, and I heard it testing the handle. Then came the scratching, deliberate and purposeful, at the door frame. I stood up, rifle raised, finger on the trigger, and I shouted. Told it to get off my property, that I was armed, that I'd shoot if it didn't leave. For a moment, nothing happened. Then it pressed its face against the kitchen window, and I saw those eyes looking right at me. There was intelligence there, cold and calculating, and something else that I can only describe as hunger. I fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and the thing outside moved so fast I almost didn't see it go. It didn't run. It flowed, like water, back across the yard and into the cornfield. I called 911, and within 20 minutes my house was surrounded by sheriff's deputies. They searched the property with spotlights and dogs, but they found nothing except more tracks and the damage to my doorframe. The next day, I made the hardest decision of my farming career. I harvested that entire north field, every stalk of corn, took it down to bare soil. If that thing was using my field for cover, for hunting ground, I was going to take that advantage away. It took 3 days of round-the-clock work, but I did it. And you know what? It worked. The thing never came back. No more sightings, no more scratches, no more tracks. But here's what keeps me up at night. About a week after I finished harvesting that field, Deputy Martinez came by to tell me they'd gotten the analysis back from the university on those samples. The experts couldn't identify what animal had left them. The tracks, the scratch marks, the patches of hair they found on my fence. None of it matched any known species. They suggested it might be a bear with some kind of deformity, or maybe a person in a costume pulling an elaborate hoax. But I could tell from Martinez's face that he didn't believe either explanation. 3 months have passed since then. I've had security cameras installed around the entire property, motion sensor lights on every building, and I've kept that north field clear. No corn, just soybeans now, which don't grow tall enough to hide something that size. Gunner's back to his normal self, though he still won't go near the tree line. And I've started sleeping with my rifle within arm's reach. The thing is, I've been farming this land my whole life. I know every inch of these fields, every animal that lives in these woods. What was on my property for those 4 nights wasn't anything natural, wasn't anything that should exist. And the worst part? I don't think it's gone. I think it's just moved on, found another farm with taller crops, another family to terrorize. Sometimes, late at night, I hear that sound in the distance, that rising keen that makes my skin crawl. And I know, somewhere out there in the darkness between the farms, that thing is still out there, still hunting, still watching. The clicking started when my headlamp battery hit 20%, and by the time I realized what I was hearing, it was already too late to turn back. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I'm a geologist specializing in karst formations, which is a fancy way of saying I study caves for a living. And what I encountered in an unmapped section of Mammoth Cave during a solo research expedition last April has fundamentally changed how I view the world beneath our feet. I need to be clear about something from the start. I'm a scientist. I deal in facts, measurements, peer-reviewed data. Before this happened, I would have laughed at cryptid stories, dismissed them as misidentifications or fabrications. I've spent 15 years exploring cave systems across 3 continents, logged over 2,000 hours underground, and I've never seen anything that couldn't be explained by geology, biology, or simple human error. That changed on April 18th, when I descended into Section Q7 of Mammoth Cave, a passage system that hadn't been fully mapped since the 1970s. I had all the proper permits, of course. The National Park Service knew I was going in, had my route plan, my expected return time. I was equipped with redundant lighting systems, communication devices, emergency supplies for 72 hours, GPS tracking, everything by the book. I've done hundreds of solo surveys like this. It's actually preferable for certain types of research, fewer variables, no one else's movements disturbing sediment samples, or geological formations I'm trying to document. On paper, it was a routine expedition into a known cave system. The reality turned out to be very different. I entered through the cathedral access point at 6:47 a.m. The initial descent took about 40 minutes, following established routes the tourists have walked for decades. But at the 2-mile mark, I diverged onto a service tunnel that led to the older, less traveled sections. The temperature dropped immediately. That constant 54 degrees that caves maintain year-round, and the sounds of the commercial areas faded behind me until all I could hear was my own breathing and the occasional drip of water from the limestone ceiling. Q7 starts with a narrow squeeze, barely 18 inches wide in places, that opens into a series of chambers ranging from small rooms to cathedral-sized caverns. My research focused on analyzing crystalline deposits that could provide climate data going back thousands of years. Fascinating stuff, usually. I was about 4 hours in, roughly 3 miles from the entrance, when I first noticed something odd. There were scratch marks on the cave floor, long parallel grooves in the limestone that looked fresh. Not geologically fresh, but recent enough that they hadn't accumulated the typical calcite coating you see on older formations. I documented them, of course, took photos, measurements. My first thought was that another research team had been through with equipment, maybe dragged something heavy that scraped the rock. But the marks were organic looking, curved in a way that suggested biological origin rather than mechanical, and they were coming from a passage that wasn't on my map, a side tunnel barely visible behind a flowstone formation. Standard procedure says stick to your planned route. But scientific curiosity is a powerful thing, and I was already thinking about what might have made those marks. A bear that wandered in and got disoriented? Some kind of large rodent population I could document? I should have stuck to the plan, should have noted the location and reported it when I got back to the surface. Instead, I squeezed through the gap and followed the scratches into unmapped territory. The passage sloped downward at about a 15-degree angle, the ceiling getting lower until I was hunching over, then crawling. My helmet scraped limestone as I moved forward, and I was mentally calculating how difficult the return journey would be when the tunnel suddenly opened into a chamber I couldn't immediately gauge the size of. I stood up, played my headlamp across the space, and felt that rare thrill that geologists live for. The chamber was enormous, maybe 100 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. The walls were covered in formations I'd never seen before, bizarre crystalline structures that seemed to grow in spirals and fractals. I was already composing the paper in my head, thinking about the recognition this discovery would bring, when I heard it for the first time. Click, 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 click. It was rhythmic, deliberate, coming from somewhere above and to my left. I assumed it was water dripping onto a resonant surface, some acoustic quirk of the chamber's geometry. I moved toward the center of the space, setting up my equipment to take measurements, and that's when my primary headlamp flickered. I tapped it, the universal gesture of frustrated technology users everywhere, and it stabilized. But the battery indicator, which had shown 60% when I entered the chamber, now read 20%. That was wrong. Impossible, really. LED technology doesn't drain that fast, and I'd charged everything fully the night before. I checked my backup lights. Same thing, both showing critically low battery when they should have been at full power. And my GPS unit was dead entirely, screen black, unresponsive to any input. The only thing still working was my analog compass and watch. And suddenly that chamber felt a lot less exciting and a lot more dangerous. I made the decision to abort. Whatever was causing the electrical interference, whatever had drained my batteries, I needed to get out and report it. But as I turned back toward the entrance passage, my headlamp swept across the ceiling, and I saw them. Marks. Hundreds of scratch marks covering the limestone surface, concentrated around what looked like natural shelves and crevices in the rock. And in one of those crevices, maybe 40 feet up, something moved. I froze. Told myself it was a bat. Had to be a bat, even though I hadn't seen any bat populations in this section. Even though the movement had been too large, too deliberate. I kept my light on that spot, and for several seconds, nothing happened. Then it moved again, and I got my first clear look at what was sharing that chamber with me. It was pale. Not albino animal pale, but a kind of translucent white that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The body was roughly humanoid in structure, but elongated. All limbs and joints that bent in ways that made my anatomy training rebel. 4 arms, maybe 5. It was hard to tell where one limb ended and another began. They gripped the rock with fingers that were too long, too numerous, moving with a fluidity that looked more like an octopus than anything terrestrial. And the head, if that's what it was, had a shape I still can't adequately describe. Elongated vertically, with what might have been sensory organs clustered at the front, but no eyes that I could identify. No eyes at all. It was watching me anyway. I knew it was watching me, could feel its attention like a physical weight, and it was making that clicking sound, irregular now, faster, like it was processing information or communicating with something I couldn't see. I took a step backward, slowly, trying not to make sudden movements, and my boot dislodged a small rock. The sound of it clattering across the cave floor seemed deafening in that confined space. The thing moved, not toward me but laterally across the ceiling, covering maybe 20 feet in a single fluid motion. Those too many arms found holds on the rock face with unsettling precision, and I realized with growing horror that it was positioning itself between me and the exit passage. The clicking intensified, became almost frantic, and I heard an answering click from somewhere else in the chamber. Then another, then several more, coming from different directions, different heights. There were multiple creatures. I couldn't see them all, but I could hear them, could catch glimpses of pale movement in the darkness beyond my failing headlamp's range. They were surrounding me, coordinating, and the clicking had taken on a pattern that sounded disturbingly like language. I've studied animal behavior, know that some species use complex vocalizations for communication, but this was different. This was organized, tactical. My headlamp dimmed further, 15%, 10. I fumbled for my backup light, the handheld flashlight I kept clipped to my belt, and got it turned on just as the headlamp died completely. The flashlight's beam was weaker, more focused, creating a small circle of visibility in absolute darkness. And in that darkness, I heard them moving, not just on the ceiling anymore, but on the walls, on the floor, getting closer. I ran, not toward the entrance I'd come through, that was blocked, but toward what I hoped was another passage on the far side of the chamber. It was a desperate move, geologically stupid. Running blind into unmapped cave systems is how people die underground. But staying in that chamber with those things was certain death. I could hear them behind me, that clicking becoming a cacophony of sound, and worse, I could hear the scraping of their movement, the sound of those elongated fingers finding purchase on rock as they pursued. I found a gap in the wall, barely large enough for a human body, and squeezed through without thinking, without checking what was on the other side. I felt something grab at my ankle, fingers that were cold and damp and had too many joints, but my momentum carried me through, and I kicked backward hard, connecting with something that made a sound like nothing I'd ever heard. A shriek, high-pitched and prolonged, that echoed through the cave system and set my teeth on edge. The passage on the other side was low and tight, forcing me to crawl on my belly, dragging my equipment behind me. My flashlight was still working, barely, showing me limestone inches from my face, and more of those scratch marks covering every surface. I could hear them behind me, trying to follow, but the passage was too narrow for their larger frames. The clicking was angry now, frustrated, punctuated by that same shrieking sound. I crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The passage twisted, branched, and I took turns at random, just trying to put distance between myself and those things. My flashlight died somewhere in that maze of tunnels, leaving me in absolute darkness that was so complete it felt solid. I've experienced cave darkness before, practiced navigation without lights as part of my training, but this was different. This was darkness that had things living in it, things that belonged there, while I very definitely did not. I kept moving by touch, one hand on the wall, feeling my way forward. My compass was useless without light to read it by, and I'd lost all sense of direction. I had no idea if I was moving deeper into the cave system or toward the surface. All I could do was keep going and hope that eventually I'd find my way to a known passage. At some point, I realized the clicking had stopped. I couldn't hear them anymore, couldn't sense that presence that had been so overwhelming in the chamber. Either they'd given up the pursuit, or I'd moved beyond their territory, or I was so lost they knew I'd die down here anyway and weren't worth the effort. That last thought was the scariest one, and I pushed it away, focused on the immediate problem of navigation. I don't know how long I was in absolute darkness. My watch said it was 8:34 p.m. when I finally saw light. Not artificial light, but the faint gray glow that meant I was approaching an area with surface illumination. I moved toward it like a drowning person swimming for air, faster now, scrambling over rock formations and through passages that I didn't bother analyzing or documenting. I just needed out. The light was coming from Crystal Lake Avenue, one of the developed tourist routes. I'd somehow navigated through miles of unmapped passages and intersected with the commercial section of the cave. There were safety lights strung along the pathway, handrails, paved walkways. It looked like civilization, like safety, and I nearly cried with relief when I pulled myself up onto that developed trail. The park rangers found me 30 minutes later. I'd triggered every sensor between Crystal Lake and the main entrance, and they'd sent a team to investigate. I was hypothermic, dehydrated, covered in limestone dust, and my own blood from a dozen cuts and scrapes I didn't remember getting. They took me to the hospital in Cave City, kept me overnight for observation, asked a lot of questions about what had happened. I told them I'd gotten disoriented in Q7, that my equipment had failed, that I'd panicked and taken a wrong turn. I told them I needed to file an incident report, that there was something in those unmapped passages that needed to be investigated. They nodded, made notes, were very understanding and professional, and then very gently, they told me that happens sometimes. Cave systems play tricks on people's minds, especially solo explorers. The darkness, the isolation, the disorientation, it can create experiences that feel real but aren't. I tried to insist, told them about the creatures, about the coordinated hunting behavior, about the electrical interference. They listened patiently, and then suggested that maybe I should take some time off, see a therapist who specializes in trauma, let my mind process the experience. They made it clear, without actually saying it, that if I pushed the issue, If I went public with claims about unknown creatures in Mammoth Cave, my career would be over. I'd become that scientist, the one who lost credibility, whose research gets dismissed because they had one bad experience underground. So I didn't push it. I filed a sanitized report, citing equipment failure and poor judgment in deviating from my planned route. I took a month off, saw the therapist they recommended, went through the motions of recovery, and I started researching. Not officially, not through academic channels, but late at night on my laptop, searching through obscure forums and archived incident reports and historical records. I found things. Not proof. Nothing that would hold up to peer review, but suggestions. References to unexplained sounds in deep cave systems. Explorers who reported equipment failures similar to mine. A few mentions, mostly dismissed as folklore, of pale cave-dwelling creatures in various parts of the world. And one report, buried in Park Service archives from 1973, about a mapping expedition to Q7 that was abruptly canceled after 2 team members reported seeing something they couldn't identify. The official reason given was safety concerns about unstable formations. No further details. It's been 6 months now. I'm back at work, back to doing cave surveys, though I notice I don't go alone anymore. I bring a partner, sometimes a whole team, even for routine research that doesn't require it. My colleagues think I developed anxiety after the incident, that I need the company for psychological comfort. They're not entirely wrong, but that's not the whole reason. The thing that keeps me awake at night isn't what I saw in that chamber. It's what I didn't see. Those creatures, whatever they were, had adapted to live in complete darkness, had developed coordination and communication sophisticated enough for group hunting, and they'd chosen to live in the deepest, most isolated parts of a cave system that extends for over 400 miles. We've only mapped about half of Mammoth Cave. Only half. Which means there are 200 miles of passages down there that we know nothing about. Vast sections of an underground world that could be hiding populations of creatures we never imagined existed. Sometimes, when I'm down in the caves now, doing my research, taking my samples, I hear clicking sounds in the distance. My colleagues don't hear it, or they dismiss it as water dripping or rock settling. But I know better. I know what's down there, in the dark, in the deep places where humans rarely go. And I know they're still there, still hunting, still watching. The only difference is, now they know we exist too. And they know at least one of us knows about them. I'm telling you this because someone needs to know the truth. If something happens to me on a future expedition, if I disappear into those caves and they never find my body, I want there to be a record somewhere of what I encountered. And I want you to understand something. Mammoth Cave isn't special. It's just the longest known cave system in the world. There are thousands of others all over the planet that go just as deep, just as far. And if those things are in Mammoth Cave, adapted to the darkness, thriving in the depths, then they're probably in other cave systems too, living right beneath our feet in a world we barely understand, watching and waiting in the eternal dark. I've always considered myself a good person, the type who stops to help injured animals on the side of the road, which is exactly why I'm alive to tell you this, and my hiking partner isn't. My name is Kevin Torres. I'm a high school biology teacher from Asheville, and what I encountered on the Appalachian Trail last October has made me question everything I thought I knew about predator intelligence and mimicry in nature. It happened during fall break, that perfect window in mid-October, when the leaves are at peak color and the tourist crowds have thinned out enough that you can actually enjoy some solitude on the trail. My buddy Jason Chen and I had planned this trip for months. 3 days, 2 nights, a 40-mile loop through some of the more remote sections of the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina. We'd been hiking together since college, knew each other's pace, trusted each other's judgment in the backcountry. Jason was the more experienced outdoorsman, had done sections of the Pacific Crest Trail, knew wilderness first aid, carried bear spray even though black bear attacks are statistically negligible. I was the biology nerd, the guy who stopped every 20 minutes to identify plants or point out interesting fungal growth on dead logs. Day 1 was perfect. Clear skies, temperature in the low 60s, that crisp autumn air that makes you feel alive. We covered 12 miles, set up camp near a creek, made dinner over our portable stove, and fell asleep to the sound of water over rocks and the occasional hoot of a barred owl. Day 2 started the same way. We broke camp at dawn, filtered water from the creek, and were back on the trail by 7:30. The plan was to cover 15 miles and camp at a shelter marked on our map, then do the final 13 miles out on day 3. Around 2 in the afternoon, maybe 10 miles into our hike, we came around a bend in the trail and saw it. A deer lying in the middle of the path about 30 yards ahead. It was a doe, looked like a whitetail, and it was positioned in this awkward way, legs splayed out, head turned back toward us. Even from that distance, something about it looked wrong, but my first instinct was concern. Deer don't usually lie down in the middle of hiking trails. They're skittish, bolt at the first sign of humans. This one wasn't moving. "Injured, you think?" Jason asked, already shrugging off his pack. "Maybe hit by a mountain biker earlier," I suggested, though the trail we were on was pretty technical, not really suitable for bikes. "Or sick." We approached slowly, making soft noises so we wouldn't startle it if it was still alive. As we got closer, maybe 15 yards away, I started noticing details that made my biology training send up red flags. The deer's legs were bent at angles that weren't quite right. Not broken, just positioned wrong, like someone who'd never seen a deer before had tried to pose one from a description. And its neck was long. Too long. I'd seen plenty of white-tailed deer, had dissected one in my college comparative anatomy class, and the proportions weren't matching up. "Kevin, hold up," Jason said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He'd noticed it too. The deer's eyes were wrong. Deer are prey animals, have eyes positioned on the sides of their heads for maximum peripheral vision. This thing's eyes were too forward-facing, almost predatory in placement. And they weren't moving, weren't blinking, just staring at us with this fixed intensity that made my skin crawl. "That's not right," I said, stating the obvious. That's when it moved. Not like a startled animal scrambling to its feet, but deliberately, methodically. The legs straightened out, those two long joints extending, and the thing rose up, and kept rising. The front legs weren't legs anymore, or maybe they'd never been legs. They were arms, ending in appendages that looked more like hands than hooves, gripping the ground as it pushed itself vertical. The body was wrong too, more cylindrical than a deer's ribcage should be, covered in patchy fur that looked matted and artificial. But it was the head that made my mind completely reject what I was seeing. As it stood, that elongated neck kept extending, vertebrae visible under the skin, and the head rotated to face us fully. The snout was too long, the jaw too wide, and when it opened its mouth, I saw teeth. Not the flat molars of an herbivore, but pointed carnivorous teeth, arranged in rows that went back impossibly far into its throat. "Run," Jason said very quietly, very calmly. Then louder, "Run!" We ran, dropped our packs, dropped everything, and sprinted back down the trail the way we'd come. Behind us, I heard this sound, this vocalization that started as a deer's bleat but shifted, modulated, became something else entirely. It sounded curious, almost playful, like it was experimenting with sounds to see what we'd respond to. And then I heard it moving, heard branches snapping and leaves crunching, and it was fast, faster than anything that size should be able to move through dense forest. The trail twisted back and forth, following the contour of the hillside, and Jason was ahead of me by maybe 10 feet. He'd always been the faster runner, had done track in high school. I was pushing myself harder than I ever had, lungs burning, legs pumping, but I could hear that thing behind us, getting closer, It wasn't following the trail. It was cutting through the forest, moving in ways that didn't match any animal locomotion I'd ever studied. "Off trail," Jason shouted back at me. "It's hurting us." He was right. Every time we tried to veer off the path, we'd hear that thing moving to cut us off, forcing us back onto the trail. It was intelligent, strategic, driving us like a sheepdog drives sheep, and it was learning. Each time we tried to dodge, it anticipated better, moved faster to block us. We were being hunted by something that was actively problem-solving, adapting its tactics in real time. We ran for maybe 10 minutes straight, an eternity when you're sprinting in hiking boots on uneven terrain. My ankle rolled on a root, sharp pain shooting up my leg, but adrenaline kept me moving. Jason glanced back, checking on me, and that moment of distraction cost him. His foot caught on a rock, and he went down hard, tumbling forward onto the trail. I stopped, grabbed his arm, tried to haul him up. Come on, come on." He scrambled to his feet, but his knee had hit wrong and he stumbled. "Go, Kevin, go. Not leaving you, shut up and move." But it was too late. The thing burst out of the forest to our right, and I got my first clear look at its full form. It was maybe 8 feet tall when upright, but it moved between bipedal and quadrupedal locomotion with fluid ease. The deer head was clearly a lure, some kind of evolved or constructed camouflage designed to make prey approach. The real head, or maybe its true face, was underneath, partially hidden by the elongated neck. I caught glimpses of too many eyes, multifaceted like an insect's, and that mouth full of teeth that clicked together as it breathed. It circled us, not attacking, just moving in this predatory orbit while making sounds. It cycled through a deer's bleat, then a child crying, then something that sounded disturbingly like human laughter. It was testing, I realized, trying different sounds to see what would make us freeze, make us easier prey. This thing had probably been hunting humans for years, maybe decades, learning what worked, what made us stop and investigate instead of running. Jason had his bear spray out, hands shaking. On 3. I nodded. We had maybe one chance. Bear spray has a range of about 30 feet, creates a cloud of capsaicin that's supposed to deter even the most aggressive animals. It was designed for 600-pound grizzlies. I had no idea if it would work on whatever this thing was, but it was all we had. 1. The creature moved closer, that false deer head bobbing on its neck like a grotesque puppet. 2. It opened its mouth wider, and I saw something like a tongue, but segmented, reaching out toward us. 3. Jason discharged the spray, and I did the same from the canister on my belt. The orange cloud engulfed the creature, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then it made a sound I'll hear in nightmares for the rest of my life. A shriek, high-pitched and layered, like multiple voices screaming at once. It reared back, those front appendages clawing at its face, and Jason grabbed my arm. "Move, now!" We ran again, but this time Jason was limping badly. His knee was swelling. I could see it even through his hiking pants. We made maybe a quarter mile before he couldn't go any further. There was a huge oak tree just off the trail, old growth, with branches starting about 8 feet up. "Climb," he gasped. "Get up there. Use your phone to call for help." Jason. "I can't climb, Kevin. My knee's shot. But you can. Get up there. Get a signal. Call for rescue." I wanted to argue, wanted to say we'd both make it, but we could hear that thing behind us. The shrieking had stopped, which somehow was worse than when it was making noise. It meant it was hunting again, tracking us, and it would be on us in minutes. I climbed. The bark tore at my hands, my arms screamed with effort, but I hauled myself up to the first branch, then the second. Jason positioned himself at the base of the tree back against the trunk, bear spray ready for a second discharge. He looked up at me and forced a smile. "Get help, man. Tell Rachel and the kids I love them." "You're going to tell them yourself," I said, but we both knew I was lying. I climbed higher, got my phone out. No signal. Climbed higher, still nothing. The tree canopy was thick here, hills blocking transmission. I climbed until I was maybe 30 feet up, until the branches were getting too thin to safely support my weight. And finally, blessedly, a 1 bar appeared on my screen. That's when I heard Jason scream. I looked down through the branches and saw it had found us. It was circling the tree, and Jason hit it with another spray discharge. The thing recoiled again, but not as dramatically this time. It was learning, adapting, building tolerance or understanding that the pain was temporary. It backed off maybe 20 feet, and then it did something that made my blood run cold. It laid down, positioned itself in that same deer-like pose, legs splayed, fake head turned at that awkward angle. It was reset, waiting for the next hiker to come down the trail and see an injured animal, and it would wait as long as it took, hours, days, however long we stayed in that tree. It had patience. I dialed 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher answered, and I tried to explain, tried to say we were being attacked, that we needed immediate help, that there was something on the trail that wasn't natural. She kept asking me questions, trying to determine if it was a bear, a mountain lion, if anyone was injured. I could hear the skepticism in her voice when I tried to describe what we were actually dealing with. "Sir, I'm sending rangers to your location now. Can you stay on the line?" I stayed on the line, gave her our GPS coordinates from my phone, watched that thing lying in the trail like bait in a trap, and I watched Jason, sitting at the base of the tree, conserving his remaining bear spray, knowing he'd have to make it last until help arrived. The rangers found us 2 hours later. 3 of them, armed with rifles, because the dispatcher had said there was a dangerous animal incident. By the time they arrived, making enough noise that we heard them coming from 100 yards away, the thing was gone. Just vanished into the forest like it had never been there. All that remained were disturbed leaves, some broken branches, and Jason and I still alive but fundamentally changed. They hiked us out. Jason had to be, partially carried, his knee too damaged to bear weight. We gave statements, described what we'd seen. The rangers were professional, didn't mock us, but I could see they thought we'd panicked over a bear, or maybe a sick elk. They searched the area the next day, found some prints they couldn't identify, collected some hair samples from where the thing had been lying. As far as I know, those samples are still sitting in some lab somewhere, unanalyzed or dismissed as contaminated. Jason recovered physically. His knee needed surgery, months of physical therapy. He doesn't hike anymore, won't even go camping with his kids in designated campgrounds. We don't talk about what happened, not to each other, not to anyone. What would be the point? Who would believe us? But I think about it constantly. Think about how that thing used our own compassion as a weapon. It knew humans stopped to help injured animals, knew we'd approach something that looked helpless and hurt. It was perfectly adapted to hunt us, had learned our psychology, our instincts, and weaponized them. And it's still out there, still lying on some trail, still waiting for the next good person to see what they think is an injured deer and stop to help. I still teach biology. I still explain predator-prey relationships, camouflage, mimicry. But now, when I teach about anglerfish using bioluminescent lures, or snapping turtles with tongues that look like worms, I think about bigger applications, about what happens when prey becomes so successful that predators have to evolve beyond anything we'd recognize, about what might be adapting to hunt us in places we think we're safe. And I'll tell you this, I'm never helping an injured animal on a trail again. If I see a deer lying in the middle of a path, I'm turning around and walking the other way. Call me callous, call me heartless. But I've seen what happens to people who let their compassion override their survival instincts. I've seen what's waiting for good people who stop to help. Sometimes the things that look most helpless are actually the most dangerous. And sometimes the monsters are smart enough to know exactly what will make you drop your guard and approach. That's the lesson I learned on the Appalachian Trail. That's the knowledge I'll carry for the rest of my life. And that's why, when students ask me if I still go hiking, I tell them I prefer city parks now, places with pavement and streetlights and plenty of witnesses. Because out there in the forests, in the wild places where humans are visitors and not residents, there are things that have learned to hunt us, and they're getting better at it every day. The first time I heard my dead mother's voice calling from the lake, I knew something was trying to kill me, but I went to the window anyway because part of me wanted it to be real. My name is Amanda Reese. I'm a hospice nurse from Duluth, and for 2 weeks last November, I house sat a cabin on the north shore of Lake Superior, where something in the water learned every voice I've ever loved and used them against me with surgical precision. The job seemed perfect when it was offered. My friend Linda's family owned this beautiful cabin about 40 miles up the shore, near a tiny place called Hovland, Minnesota. They needed someone to stay there during the off-season, keep the pipes from freezing, make sure the roof wasn't leaking, basic caretaker stuff. In exchange, I'd get 2 weeks of solitude, lake views, and enough peace and quiet to decompress from 6 months of the hardest work I'd ever done. I'm a hospice nurse, which means I spend my days helping people die with dignity, holding hands through final breaths, comforting families through the worst moments of their lives. It's meaningful work, but it hollows you out. By November, I was running on empty, and 2 weeks alone by the lake sounded like exactly what I needed. The cabin was isolated, which I'd expected. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles down the shore road, and cell service was non-existent. There was a landline for emergencies and a satellite internet connection that worked when it felt like it. Linda had warned me it would be cold, that Lake Superior in November is no joke. But I'd grown up in Minnesota. I knew how to layer clothes and keep a fire going. What she hadn't warned me about, what she probably didn't know, was what lived in that particular stretch of water. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon, the sky already going dark by 4:30. The lake was angry, waves crashing against the rocky shore, with enough force that I could feel the impact through the cabin's foundation. Linda had left detailed instructions, showed me where everything was, made sure I knew how to work the wood stove and the generator backup. She seemed almost nervous, kept checking her watch like she wanted to leave before full dark, but I figured she was just worried about the drive back to Duluth, with weather moving in. "You have my number for the landline," she said as she was leaving. "Call if you need anything. And Amanda, don't go down to the shore after dark. The rocks are slippery, and if you fall in this time of year, hypothermia will kill you in minutes." I promised I wouldn't, watched her taillights disappear down the access road, and then I was alone. Truly alone in a way I hadn't been in months. No patients calling, no family members needing comfort, no beeping monitors or antiseptic smells. Just me, the cabin, and the constant roar of the lake against the rocks. The first 3 days were exactly what I needed. I slept late, read books I'd been meaning to get to, took long walks during daylight hours. The shoreline was beautiful in that stark winter way. The rocks were covered in ice formations, and the spray from the waves created these temporary sculptures that caught the weak sunlight. I took photos, drank too much coffee, felt myself starting to unwind. The voices started on night 4. I'd gone to bed around 10, was almost asleep when I heard it. A woman's voice, faint but distinct, calling my name from somewhere outside. "Amanda. Amanda, honey." I sat up, instantly awake. The voice was familiar in a way that made my chest tight. It sounded like my mother. My mother, who had died 8 months ago, one of the patients I'd helped through hospice before I even knew she was sick. She'd hidden her diagnosis, hadn't wanted to burden me, and by the time I found out, she had maybe 6 weeks left. I'd taken leave from work, spent every day with her, held her hand when she died on a Tuesday morning in March. "Amanda, I'm cold. Please help me." I was out of bed before I consciously decided to move, pulling on my robe, walking toward the window that faced the lake. The rational part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible, that my mother was dead, that I'd watched them cremate her body. But the daughter part, The part that was still grieving wanted desperately for it to be real. I looked out the window. The moon was nearly full, reflecting off the violent water, and I could see the shoreline clearly. There was nothing there. No one standing on the rocks, no figure in the water. But the voice came again, definitely from outside, definitely from the direction of the lake. "Amanda, I'm so cold. Why won't you help me?" I grabbed my phone for the flashlight before remembering it was dead. Hadn't charged properly with the spotty electricity. I found Linda's heavy-duty flashlight in the kitchen and went to the back door. My hand was on the knob when I remembered her warning. Don't go down to the shore after dark. Something about the urgency in how she'd said it made me pause. "Please, honey, I need you." It was perfect. The exact tone my mother had used during her last days when she needed water, or medication, or just comfort. I'd responded to that tone hundreds of times. My professional training and personal love creating an automatic reaction. But my mother was dead. Whatever was using her voice wasn't her. I stepped back from the door, flashlight shaking in my hand. The voice called a few more times, then stopped. I didn't sleep that night, sat in the living room with all the lights on until dawn broke over the lake. I should have left then, should have packed my car and driven back to Duluth and told Linda I was sorry but I couldn't stay. Instead, I convinced myself it had been some kind of auditory hallucination, stress and grief combining to create something that wasn't there. I'd been working too hard, grieving too deeply. My brain had misfired, that was all. But the next night, the voice came back, and this time, it wasn't my mother. "Amanda, it's Dad. I'm at the shore. Car broke down, and my phone's dead. Can you come help me?" My father, who lived in Arizona, who I talked to just that morning on the landline. But the voice was perfect, his exact inflection, the way he always sounded slightly embarrassed when asking for help. I went to the window again, looked out at the empty shoreline, and felt fear replace grief. Whatever was out there had access to multiple voices. It was cycling through my contacts, trying different people to see which one would make me leave the cabin. And it was learning. Each night, the voices got more sophisticated, more emotionally manipulative. Night 6 was my best friend from nursing school, Sarah, crying that she'd been in an accident on the shore road and needed help. Night 7 was my nephew, 6 years old, saying he was lost and scared and couldn't find his mommy. That one almost worked. I had my boots on, coat on, was heading for the door when I remembered that my nephew was in California with my sister, that there was no way he could be at a Minnesota lake in November. I called Linda on the landline, hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. Told her everything, expected her to think I was crazy. Instead, there was this long silence, and then she said very quietly, "It's still there." "What's still there? Linda, what is this?" Another pause. My grandfather used to tell stories about something in the lake. Said the old Ojibwe families that lived in the area before white settlers came had warnings about it. Called it the voice stealer. He said it lived in the deep water and came close to shore in late fall when the lake was cold enough. Said it would learn the voices of people you loved and use them to lure you into the water. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I thought it was just a story. My family's owned that cabin for 40 years, and nothing's ever happened. I thought my grandfather was just trying to scare us kids into being careful near the water." "Well, something is happening now, Linda, and I don't know how much longer I can resist." That was the truth. Each night, the emotional manipulation got more intense. The voices knew exactly what to say, exactly how to weaponize my compassion and my guilt. They used my mother's voice to tell me she was proud of me. Used my father's voice to say he loved me. Used my patients' voices, people I'd helped die, thanking me for my kindness and asking me to come to them. By night 9, I wasn't sleeping at all. I'd pushed furniture against the doors, covered the windows so I couldn't see the lake, but I could still hear the voices, calling and calling, and the worst part was how much I wanted to believe them. How much I wanted it to be real, Wanted one more conversation with my mother, one more chance to tell her I loved her. Night 10 was when it changed tactics. The voice that called that night was mine, my own voice, coming from the shore, screaming for help. Somebody help me. Please, I'm drowning. Help. I stood frozen in the cabin, listening to myself die over and over. The screams were desperate, terrified, and absolutely convincing. If a neighbor had been close enough to hear, they would have called emergency services, would have assumed someone was actually drowning. But there were no neighbors close enough. No one except me to hear my own voice begging for salvation. It went on for hours. My voice screaming, crying, pleading, eventually calling for my mother, for my father, for anyone to please help. I sat on the floor with my hands over my ears, but I could still hear it, still hear myself dying in that freezing water. When dawn came, the screaming stopped. I was a wreck, crying, sleep-deprived, barely rational. I knew I had to leave, had to get out before I broke completely. But when I looked outside, I saw why the voices had been so insistent. The lake had frozen overnight. A thin sheet of ice extended maybe 40 feet from shore, not thick enough to be safe, but solid enough to walk on if you were desperate enough. And standing out there, right at the edge where ice met open water, was a figure. It looked human. Looked like a woman in a nightgown, my mother's nightgown, the one she'd worn in hospice. It was standing perfectly still, and as I watched, it raised one hand and waved. My mother's wave, the exact gesture she'd used to greet me every morning during those final weeks. I grabbed my phone, remembered it was useless, grabbed the landline instead and called 911. Told them there was someone on the ice, someone who would die if they fell through. The dispatcher said she'd send someone, but I could hear skepticism in her voice. The shore was remote. Response time would be at least 40 minutes. I watched that figure the entire time. It never moved, just stood there at the edge of the ice, waiting. When the sheriff's boat finally arrived, approaching from the unfrozen water side, the figure turned toward them. And then it stepped backward, off the ice, and sank beneath the surface without a splash, without a sound. Just vanished like it had never been there. The sheriff searched for over an hour. They had sonar equipment, diving gear, protocols for drowning victims in cold water. They found nothing. No body, no evidence anyone had been in the water, no disturbance in the lake bed. Eventually, they came to the cabin to take my statement, and I could see they thought I'd imagined it, that isolation and stress had created a hallucination. Maybe they were right. Maybe none of it was real, and I'd had some kind of breakdown brought on by grief and overwork. That's what the therapist I saw afterward suggested, that I'd experienced a complicated grief reaction combined with auditory and visual hallucinations. But I know what I heard. I know those voices were real, that something in that lake had learned the people I loved and used them as bait. And I know that whatever it was, it's still there, still waiting in the deep, cold water for the next person to stay at that cabin alone. Linda sold the property 2 months later. She didn't say it was because of what I experienced. Gave some excuse about the family not using it anymore, about maintenance costs. But I know the real reason. And I know that whoever bought it, whoever decides to spend time in that isolated cabin during late fall when the lake is coldest, they're going to hear voices calling from the shore. They're going to hear the people they love most in the world, begging for help, pleading for them to come to the water. And eventually, someone won't be strong enough to resist. Someone will believe it's real, will think maybe, somehow, impossibly, the voice is genuine. And they'll go to the shore after dark. They'll step onto that treacherous ice, and Lake Superior will take them, like it's taken so many others over the centuries. I still hear the voices sometimes, even back in Duluth, even in my apartment nowhere near the water. I'll be falling asleep, and I'll hear my mother calling my name. I'll be driving home from work, and my own voice will scream from the back seat. The therapist says it's PTSD, that traumatic experiences can create persistent auditory hallucinations. But I know better. I know what's in Lake Superior, in that particular stretch of water near Hovland. I know it's waiting, patient and cold and absolutely relentless. And I know that the next time someone hears a voice they love calling from the shore, part of them will want to believe it's real. Will want it badly enough to risk everything. That's what makes it so effective. That's why it's still there after all these centuries. Because it doesn't just mimic voices. It understands human psychology, understands grief and love and desperate hope. It knows exactly which voice will break you, which words will make you forget every warning and walk into the freezing water. And sooner or later, it will find someone who can't resist. They say you never really know your neighbors until there's a crisis, but I learned mine through muddy handprints on my second-story window and a doorbell camera that captured something sprinting across my lawn at 40 miles per hour. I'm Travis Mitchell, night shift ICU nurse in Scottsdale, Arizona, and for 3 weeks last summer, something studied my routine with the patience of a predator that had learned to hunt in the suburbs. I bought the house in May, one of those cookie-cutter developments that sprang up in the desert outside Phoenix, where every third house has the same floor plan and the HOA sends you angry letters if your grass isn't the right shade of green. It was perfect for my needs. Close to the hospital, quiet neighborhood, good security. The mortgage stretched my budget, but after 5 years of apartment living, I wanted a place that was mine. Something I could come home to after 12-hour shifts and actually feel safe. The neighborhood was family-oriented. Young couples with kids, retirees who'd moved from colder climates, the occasional single professional like me. Everyone was friendly in that suburban way where you wave from your driveway, but don't really know anyone's last name. My immediate neighbors were the Harrisons on the left, couple in their 60s, and the Bradleys on the right, young family with 2 kids under 5. Normal, safe, boring in the best possible way. I work 3 12-hour shifts a week, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., Wednesday through Friday. It's brutal on your sleep schedule, but I'd adapted. I'd leave for work around 6:30, get home around 7:30 in the morning, sleep until mid-afternoon, have a few hours of daylight, then do it again. The house was usually empty when I left, and when I returned, most people already at work or school. The first sign something was wrong came on a Thursday morning in late June. I got home at my usual time, 7:32 a.m. according to my doorbell camera, parked in the garage, went inside. I was exhausted, standard post-shift zombie state, went straight to the kitchen for water before heading upstairs. That's when I noticed the sliding glass door to the backyard was open. Not broken, not forced, just unlocked, and slid open about 6 inches. I froze. My training kicked in before panic could, the same calm I use in the ICU when a patient crashes. Assess the situation. I'd locked that door before leaving for work. I distinctly remembered checking it. Someone had either unlocked it from inside, which meant they'd been in my house, or unlocked it from outside, which should have been impossible with the security bar I kept in the track. The security bar was on the floor, pushed aside. I backed out of the house, called 911 from my car. Scottsdale PD responded fast, cleared the house room by room. Nothing was missing. No signs of forced entry at any doors or windows. The only anomaly was that sliding door, and the officer admitted it was possible I'd forgotten to lock it, that the security bar had just fallen over. People get forgetful after long shifts. Happens all the time. But I knew I'd locked it. Knew it with the same certainty I know when I've administered medication or checked a patient's vitals. I have routines, systems, because in my line of work, forgetting things gets people killed. I didn't forget that door. I had the locks changed that day. Added extra security measures. Bought a couple of those Ring cameras for the front and back. The doorbell camera had been included when I bought the house, but I'd never really looked at the footage before. Now I started checking it obsessively, scrolling through every motion-activated clip. 2 days later, Saturday morning, I found something. The camera had activated at 3:47 a.m. while I was at work. The timestamp showed a figure moving across my front yard. The image quality wasn't great, night vision mode turning everything green and grainy, but I could make out a shape. It was humanoid, moving on all fours like an animal, but the proportions were wrong. Too thin, too angular, limbs too long. It crossed from the street to my house in maybe 3 seconds, fast enough that the motion was blurred, and then it was out of frame. I watched that clip 20 times, tried to convince myself it was a dog, maybe a coyote. We got those in the desert sometimes. But the movement was wrong, the size was wrong, and something about the way it moved made my skin crawl. It wasn't animal locomotion, it was something else. I showed it to my neighbor, Mr. Harrison, asked if he'd seen anything unusual. He squinted at my phone screen, shook his head. Probably just a coyote, son. They come down from the mountains when it gets hot looking for water. I'd keep an eye on your trash cans, though. They'll tear right through those. But I'd seen coyotes. This wasn't that. The next incident happened 3 days later, Tuesday night. I wasn't working that night, was actually home and awake, watching TV around 11 p.m. I heard a sound from upstairs, a scraping noise like something dragging against the exterior wall. I muted the TV, listened. The sound came again, rhythmic, deliberate. Something was outside my bedroom window. My bedroom is on the second floor. There's no balcony, no tree close enough to reach, no ladder. Nothing should be able to access that window short of a very determined person with climbing equipment. I grabbed a baseball bat from the garage, the closest thing I had to a weapon, and went upstairs. The scraping stopped as I climbed the stairs. I turned on the bedroom light, approached the window carefully. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I looked down and saw them. Muddy handprints on the glass. 5 of them, spread across the window in a pattern that suggested something had been testing the strength of the glass, pushing against it. But these weren't normal handprints. The fingers were too long, too thin, and there were too many of them. 6 fingers on each hand, maybe 7. It was hard to tell where one ended and another began, and the mud wasn't just dirt. There was something else in it, something that left a residue that looked almost organic. I called the police again, different officers this time, and I could see they were less patient than the first responders had been. They took photos of the handprints, agreed they were unusual, suggested maybe neighborhood kids playing a prank. When I showed them the doorbell camera footage, pointed out that whatever made those prints had to have climbed a smooth stucco wall to reach a second-story window. They exchanged glances that said they thought I was paranoid. Mr. Mitchell, is it possible you're experiencing some stress? Night shift work can really mess with people's perceptions. We see it a lot. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist I knew the difference between stress and something genuinely wrong, but I could see it wouldn't help. They left, promising to increase patrols in the neighborhood, and I was alone again with my handprints and my footage and my growing certainty that something was very wrong. I started documenting everything, set up more cameras, interior and exterior, started keeping a log of every anomaly, every strange noise, every motion-detected event. The pattern became clear within a week. Whatever was visiting my house was learning my schedule. It came on nights when I worked, specifically during the hours I was gone. And it was getting bolder. Week 2, it tried my doors. The camera footage showed it approaching the front door at 2:14 a.m., standing upright now instead of on all fours. It was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, painfully thin with limbs that looked too long for its body. The night vision made it hard to see details, but it appeared hairless, skin pale, and almost reflective. It reached toward the doorknob with those 2-fingered hands, tried the handle, found it locked. Then it moved to the window beside the door, pressed its face against the glass. I couldn't make out features, not clearly. The face was elongated, with dark hollows where eyes should be. No nose that I could see, just a slit, and the mouth, when it opened, was too wide, extending farther than human anatomy would allow. It stayed at that window for almost a minute, and I swear even through the grainy footage, I could feel it looking inside. Studying my home, learning the layout. Week 3, I came home Thursday morning to find scratch marks on my bedroom door, deep gouges in the wood, 4 parallel lines that went from about chest height to the floor. Whatever had made them had been inside my house, had come upstairs, had tried to get into my bedroom while I slept. But that was impossible. I'd been at work. The house had been empty, unless it had happened earlier, maybe during the few hours I slept before my shift. Maybe while I was unconscious, it had been in my house, testing my doors, trying to reach me. I stopped sleeping at home, started taking shifts at the hospital. During my off days, sleeping in my car in the hospital parking lot when I had to rest. I knew it wasn't sustainable, knew my coworkers were starting to notice I looked like hell, but I couldn't go back to that house knowing something was hunting me. I reported it all to the police, showed them the footage, the scratch marks, the handprints, filed formal reports. They were sympathetic but increasingly skeptical. Suggested I might need to talk to someone about trauma, about paranoia. One officer gently recommended I consider seeing a psychiatrist. That night shift work combined with living alone could create mental health challenges. But then Mrs. Bradley saw it. She called me Tuesday afternoon, voice shaking, asked if I could come over. I found her in her kitchen, kids at school, husband at work, hands trembling around a cup of coffee. "Travis, I saw something last night, in your yard. Around 3 in the morning, I got up with the baby, was feeding him by the window, and I don't know what I saw. It was in your backyard, moving along your fence line. It looked like a person, but wrong. The way it moved, the way it was proportioned. I thought I was seeing things, maybe still half asleep, but then it climbed over your fence and I saw it clearly in the moonlight. Did you call the police?" She shook her head, looking ashamed. I was scared they'd think I was crazy. "But Travis, you need to be careful. Whatever that thing is, it's watching your house. I think it's waiting for something." She was right. It was waiting for me to be home and vulnerable. It had learned my schedule so thoroughly that it knew exactly when I'd be gone and when I'd be sleeping. And now it was escalating, getting more aggressive, more determined to reach me. I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, couldn't keep running. I set up a trap. On Friday, my normal work night, I called in sick. Told my supervisor I had food poisoning, wouldn't be in. But I didn't tell anyone else, didn't change my routine publicly. I left for work at my normal time, drove to the end of the block, parked, and walked back to my house through the green belt behind the yards. I let myself in through the back door, checked all my cameras were working, and positioned myself in the upstairs hallway with a clear view of multiple entry points. I had my phone ready to call 911, had weapons within reach, and I waited. It came at 2:37 a.m. The motion sensors triggered first, showing it approaching from the street. It moved directly to my front door, no hesitation, like it knew exactly where it was going. It tried the handle, found it locked as always, then moved to the window. This time, instead of just looking, it started working at the frame. Those long fingers finding gaps, testing for weaknesses. I called 911, whispered that someone was trying to break into my house, gave my address. Then I turned on every light in the house, interior and exterior, flooding the property with illumination. The creature recoiled from the light, moved away from the window with that same blurred speed. But instead of running, it circled the house, looking for another entry point. I watched it through multiple camera feeds tracking its movement. When it reached the back door, I was ready. I opened the door, stood in the frame with my phone out, recording, lights blazing behind me. "I see you," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "I know what you are. I have you on camera, and the police are coming." It stood in my backyard, maybe 15 feet away, fully illuminated for the first time. It was worse than the camera footage suggested. The skin was pale and waxy, stretched too tight over a skeletal frame. The limbs were disproportionately long, ending in those horrible multi-fingered hands. And the face was a nightmare. almost featureless except for those dark eye sockets and that too wide mouth. It cocked its head, studying me, and I heard it make a sound. A clicking, wet sound that might have been communication or threat assessment. Sirens in the distance, getting closer. The creature heard them too, turned its head toward the street. Then it looked back at me, and I swear I saw intelligence there, calculation. It was deciding whether I was worth the risk. It decided I wasn't. It turned and ran, covering the distance to the back fence in seconds, clearing the 6-foot barrier without breaking stride. I watched it disappear into the desert beyond the subdivision, moving impossibly fast, and then the police were there, 3 cars, officers with weapons drawn. I showed them everything, the footage, the recordings, the fresh evidence in my yard. They searched the property, found the scratch marks on the doorframe, found footprints in the desert soil beyond my fence. Strange prints with too many toes, pressed deep into the ground like whatever made them was heavier than it looked. This time, they believed me. Or at least, they couldn't dismiss it. They took official reports, sent the footage to detectives, contacted Animal Control and Wildlife Management. The story made local news. Unidentified creature terrorizes Scottsdale neighborhood. Other residents came forward with their own experiences. Strange sounds at night, glimpses of something pale moving through yards, pets that disappeared. A wildlife expert suggested it might be a hairless coyote with some kind of deformity, but admitted the footage didn't match known animal behavior. A cryptozoologist contacted me, wanted to discuss the Rake, some kind of internet legend about hairless humanoid creatures that stalked people. I didn't know what to believe. What I do know is that it hasn't come back. Not to my house, at least. I've kept the cameras running, kept documenting, but there's been nothing since that night. Maybe the police presence scared it off. Maybe it decided I was too much trouble. Or maybe it just moved on to easier prey, to someone less prepared, less vigilant. I still live in that house, though I've considered moving. I've reinforced every entry point, installed commercial-grade security, keep lights on motion sensors around the entire property. My neighbors are more careful now, more aware. We've started a neighborhood watch, share security footage, keep track of anomalies. But sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to sleep, I think about how long that thing was watching me before I noticed. Think about how it learned my routine, my vulnerabilities, with the patience of something that's been hunting humans long enough to understand our patterns. Think about how it chose a suburban neighborhood, where people feel safe, where no one expects monsters. And I wonder how many others are out there, in how many subdivisions, watching and waiting and learning, patient predators that have adapted to hunt us in the places we think we're most protected. That's the real horror. Not that monsters exist, but that they've learned to live among us. Some friendships don't survive tragedy, but ours died because I watched my best friend stop being human over the course of 8 days. And when rescue finally came, I was the only one left to tell them what he'd become. My name is Rebecca Hayes. I'm a wilderness guide from Ely, Minnesota. And last February, I led 4 experienced winter campers into the Boundary Waters canoe area, where something ancient was waiting for one of us to break. And once it found him, it wore him like a suit made of hunger and cold. I need to explain something about winter camping in northern Minnesota before I tell you what happened. It's not like summer camping where you paddle between campsites and cook fish over open fires. Winter in the Boundary Waters is a different world entirely. Temperatures regularly hit -20, -30 on bad nights. The lakes freeze solid enough to support trucks. You ski or snowshoe to your campsite, melt snow for water, manage your calories obsessively because your body is burning through them, just trying to stay warm. It's beautiful and deadly in equal measure, and you don't go in unprepared. Our group was not unprepared. There was me, 32, professional guide with winter wilderness certifications, Derek Chen, 34, my business partner and best friend since high school, experienced climber and camper, His wife Lisa, 31, emergency room physician, tough as nails. Jake Morrison, 28, park ranger with extensive cold weather training. And Samantha Price, 29, outdoor educator, had spent a winter in Antarctica on a research team. We weren't tourists playing at adventure. We knew what we were doing. The plan was simple. 7 days, late February, skiing into a remote campsite on Knife Lake, about 12 miles from the nearest road access. We'd done similar trips before, knew the area, had emergency protocols and satellite communication devices. The weather forecast was clear, cold, but stable. No storms predicted for the entire week. We went in on a Saturday, February 18th. The first 2 days were perfect. Clear skies, temperatures around -15, manageable. We set up our camp in a protected cove, established our routines. Derek was in charge of fire management, keeping our main campfire going for cooking and morale. Lisa handled medical supplies and monitored everyone for signs of hypothermia or frostbite. Jake managed our food stores, calculating calories and rationing. Sam took weather observations. I coordinated everything, made decisions about our daily activities. Day 3, the weather changed. A storm rolled in that hadn't been in any forecast, coming down from Canada fast and vicious. Temperature dropped to -35. Wind picked up to 40 miles per hour. Snow fell so thick you couldn't see 10 feet. We made the call to stay put, rode it out in our tents and the emergency shelter we'd constructed. Standard protocol. We had food for 10 days, fuel for 2 weeks. We'd wait it out. Except the storm didn't stop. Day 4, still snowing. Day 5, same. By day 6, we were getting concerned. We were going through fuel faster than planned because of the extreme cold. Food was okay, but the storm had buried our camp under 4 feet of new snow, and digging out was exhausting work that burned calories we needed for warmth. Day 7, Derek started acting different. He'd always been the positive one, the guy who kept morale up with jokes and stories. But that morning, he barely spoke, just sat by the fire, staring into it, not eating his breakfast. Lisa noticed first, went into doctor mode, checked his temperature and vitals. Everything was normal physically, but something was off. "Derek, honey, you need to eat," she said, offering him the oatmeal he'd barely touched. "Not hungry." His voice was flat, emotionless. "You have to eat. Your body needs the calories." I said I'm not hungry. This went on all day. He refused food, barely drank water, just sat by the fire or stood at the edge of camp, staring out into the storm. That night, in the tent he shared with Lisa, I heard them arguing. Her worried voice, his monotone responses. Eventually, silence. Day 8, he didn't sleep. Lisa told me in the morning, eyes red from crying, or lack of sleep, or both. She said he'd sat up all night, just staring at the tent wall, not responding when she talked to him. She wanted to call for emergency evacuation, but the storm was too severe. No helicopter could fly in these conditions, and skiing out 12 miles in -40 with whiteout conditions would be suicide. We wait for the storm to break, I decided. Keep an eye on him. If he gets physically worse, we reassess. But he wasn't getting physically worse. He was getting physically better. Despite not eating, despite not sleeping, he looked more alert, more energetic. His eyes, which had been dull and glazed, were now bright. Too bright. They caught the firelight in a way that made me uncomfortable, reflecting it back like an animal's eyes. Day 9, I woke up to screaming. Lisa's voice, terrified, calling for help. I burst out of my tent to find Derek standing over the food cache. He'd torn it open, scattered supplies everywhere, and he was eating. Not normal eating. He'd ripped open a package of raw ground beef we'd brought for chili and was shoving it into his mouth with both hands, frozen blood smearing his face. "Derek, what the hell?" Jake moved toward him, and Derek spun around. His face. God, his face. The expression was wrong, mouth too wide, teeth bared, and his eyes were wild. Not human wild, animal wild, predator wild. Mine, he said, voice distorted, deeper than normal. My food. Derek, it's for everyone. I tried to keep my voice calm, non-threatening. We share the food. You know that. He dropped the frozen meat and looked at his hands like he was seeing them for the first time. The expression shifted, became confused, almost frightened. What am I? Then he ran, just bolted into the forest, moving fast despite the snow, despite wearing only thermal underwear and boots. We chased him, shouting his name, but he was impossibly quick. We found him an hour later, huddled against a tree, shivering, crying. Something's wrong with me, he whispered as we wrapped him in blankets. I can't stop thinking about. I'm so hungry all the time. And I keep thinking about what? Lisa held his face, forcing him to look at her. About how you'd taste. He said it matter-of-factly, like commenting on the weather. All of you. I keep thinking about it. How warm you'd be. How much energy. How good it would feel to. We got him back to camp. Had an emergency meeting while Derek slept, or pretended to sleep, in his tent. Lisa was adamant we needed to evacuate immediately, storm or no storm. Jake agreed. Sam was uncertain. I was the tiebreaker. The storm's supposed to break tomorrow, I said, checking the satellite weather feed. We wait one more day. If it clears, we ski out immediately. If it doesn't, we attempt evacuation anyway. That night, we took turns on watch. Made sure someone was always awake, always between Derek and the rest of us. Not because we thought he'd actually hurt us, because we thought he might hurt himself, that whatever psychological break he was having might push him to self-harm. At 3 a.m. during Jake's watch, Derek started talking. Jake woke the rest of us because what Derek was saying wasn't English, wasn't any language any of us recognized. It was guttural, rhythmic, with clicking sounds and vowels that seemed to require more than one voice box to produce. And he was doing it in his sleep, eyes closed, body perfectly still, except for his mouth forming these impossible sounds. Then his eyes opened, but they were wrong. The irises had gone pale, almost white, and his pupils were too large, too dark. He looked at each of us in turn, and when his gaze met mine, I felt recognition there. Not Derek recognizing me. Something else, something wearing Derek recognizing prey. It's awake now, Sam whispered. Oh God, he's gone. Derek's gone. Derek sat up slowly, movements too fluid, too controlled. When he spoke, it was Derek's voice, but wrong. Layered, multiple tones. So hungry, so long since feeding, so long in the cold. You brought me a body, brought me heat, brought me form. What are you? Lisa's medical training warred with terror. What's happened to my husband? Husband. The thing wearing Derek tilted his head too far, vertebrae cracking. This meat had bonds, had love. It seemed genuinely curious. Doesn't matter. Bonds don't fill the emptiness. Only flesh. Only warm meat still pumping blood. We ran. All four of us, grabbing emergency supplies, the satellite phone, whatever we could carry in seconds. We ran into the -40 night with a storm still raging because staying near that thing was worse than freezing too. Death in the wilderness. We made it maybe 2 miles before we had to stop, had to get shelter set up or die of exposure. We dug a snow cave, huddled together, called for emergency rescue on the satellite phone. The response was what we expected. No helicopter until the storm cleared. Earliest possible extraction was dawn if weather improved. We heard it following us. Heard it moving through the forest, calling to us in Derek's voice, in Lisa's voice, in voices of people we'd known who died. It had access to Derek's memories, his knowledge of us, and it used everything it knew to try to lure us out. Lisa, I'm sorry, I'm so cold, please help me. Derek's voice, perfect mimicry of pain and fear. Lisa was sobbing silently, hands over her mouth. Sam held her, and Jake and I blocked the entrance to our shelter. He's gone, I said quietly. Whatever that is, Derek's not in there anymore. But we were wrong about that. At dawn, when the storm finally broke, and we heard helicopter rotors in the distance, the thing came back. It stood at the entrance to our shelter, and for a moment Derek looked out through those pale eyes. "Please," his real voice cracking with effort. "It's eating me from inside. It's using my body like a puppet, and I can't stop it. And I'm so hungry I can't think. Kill me. Before it's completely in control. Please." The helicopter was landing, crew members approaching. The thing heard them, turned Derek's head toward the sound. When it looked back at us, Derek was gone again, subsumed by whatever had infected him. It ran. The Derek thing bolted into the forest with that same impossible speed, and we let it go. The rescue crew found us, got us on the helicopter. As we lifted off, I saw it one last time. A figure standing in a clearing, impossibly thin now, barely recognizable as human, watching us leave. They searched for Derek for 2 weeks. Found our campsite, found signs of disturbance, found tracks that didn't match human or animal. Found nothing else. He was declared dead, lost to exposure, and possible psychological breakdown. Only the 4 of us knew the truth, and we'd agreed not to share it. Who would believe us? Lisa divorced Derek's memory 6 months later. Couldn't stand the legal limbo of being married to someone who was missing, presumed dead, but might be something worse. Sam quit outdoor education, moved to Texas, somewhere warm. Jake transferred to a different park system, as far from the Boundary Waters as he could get. I still guide, but not winter trips. Never winter trips. And I've researched, spent hours in libraries and online, looking for explanations. I found stories. Old Ojibwe legends about the Wendigo, a spirit of insatiable hunger that possesses people who resort to cannibalism, or who are exposed to extreme cold and isolation. It makes them into monsters, gives them strength and speed, but takes away everything that makes them human. The legends say once someone becomes a Wendigo, there's no cure. They roam, forever, hunting, feeding, never satisfied, and they're strongest in winter, in the deep cold, in the isolated places where people are vulnerable. Sometimes I wonder if Derek is still out there, if whatever possessed him is still using his body, still hunting in the Boundary Waters. Park rangers have reported strange incidents, campsites found torn apart, food caches raided in ways that suggest human intelligence but animal savagery, hikers who report being followed by something that moves too fast, something that calls to them in familiar voices. I tell myself, it can't be him. Tell myself that after 1.5 years, Derek's body would have given out, that even possessed flesh and bone can only endure so much. But the legends say Wendigos can survive indefinitely, that the spirit sustains the body beyond normal human limits. And on winter nights, when the temperature drops below 0 and I'm safe in my house in Ely, I sometimes hear scratching at my window. I see movement in the tree line behind my house. I hear my name called in Derek's voice, begging me to come out to help him, to save him. I never go out. I never help, because I know it's not Derek asking. It's the thing that ate him from inside, the hunger that wears his face and uses his voice and remembers that we were friends. That's what happened in the Boundary Waters last February. That's why I don't guide winter trips anymore. And that's why, if you ever plan to camp in the deep wilderness during the coldest months, you need to understand something. There are things in the winter woods that are older than our understanding, that wait for people to become vulnerable, and once they find a way in, they never let go. Derek's still out there, or what used to be Derek. And every winter, when the temperatures drop and the Boundary Waters freeze solid, it gets stronger, hungrier, more patient, waiting for the next group of unprepared campers who think they understand wilderness survival. They don't. None of us really do, because the real danger isn't the cold or the isolation. It's what the cold and isolation can wake up, both in the world and inside you. 48 hours is all they say you get after you see it, and I'm on hour 43 right now, which is why I'm recording this on my phone while driving 70 miles per hour down Interstate 64, trying to get as far from Point Pleasant, West Virginia as possible before whatever's coming finds me. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm a long-haul trucker out of Columbus, Ohio, and 3 nights ago I saw something standing on the Route 2 overpass that I know in my bones was waiting specifically for me, and every driver who's reported seeing it before me died within 2 days. I need to explain how I know this. It's not folklore or urban legend or internet conspiracy theories. It's documented fact, recorded by other truckers, by the Highway Patrol, by people who kept logs and made reports that no one wanted to believe until it was too late. The Mothman of Point Pleasant has been sighted periodically since 1966, famous for appearing before the Silver Bridge collapse that killed 46 people. Most people think the sightings ended after that, think it was mass hysteria, or misidentified birds, or hoaxes. But the trucking community knows different. There's a network, an informal database that drivers maintain on private forums, where we log anomalous events on specific routes, strange accidents, equipment failures, sightings of things that don't make sense. Route 2 through Point Pleasant has been flagged for years. Drivers report seeing a large figure on the overpasses, always at night, always standing in the same position. Massive wingspan, reflective red eyes, humanoid but wrong, and every single driver who's reported seeing it clearly enough to make a positive identification has been involved in a fatal accident within 48 hours. Not all accidents, deaths, specific targeted deaths that happen in ways that seem impossible. Brake failures on newly serviced trucks, tire blowouts at exactly the wrong moment on dangerous curves, heart attacks in drivers with no history of cardiac issues. And always, there are witnesses who report seeing something in the moments before the crash, something with wings. I didn't believe it. I've been driving for 15 years, crossed Route 2 hundreds of times, never had an issue. The Mothman stuff was campfire stories, I thought. Drivers getting spooked by owls or turkey vultures and letting their imaginations run wild. I had one of the best safety records in my company. No accidents, no violations, no close calls. I prided myself on being rational, careful, professional. 3 nights ago, Tuesday, April 9th, I was hauling a load of automotive parts from Cleveland to Charleston. Standard route, one I'd driven dozens of times. Left Cleveland at 4 p.m., planning to drive straight through, arrive in Charleston around 1 a.m. Weather was clear, traffic was light, everything was routine. I reached Point Pleasant around 10:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I just checked my GPS, calculating I was making good time. Route 2 runs along the Ohio River there, narrow 2-lane road with overpasses at regular intervals. I was approaching the Route 62 overpass, maybe 2 miles south of the city limits when I saw it. A figure standing on the overpass railing, massive, easily 7 feet tall with a wingspan that extended at least 10 feet on each side. The wings weren't moving, weren't flapping, just spread wide in a perfect arc. And the eyes. 2 points of red light at what would be head height, reflecting my headlights with an intensity that was impossible. No animal eyes reflect like that. No natural phenomenon creates that specific color and luminosity. I slowed down automatically, some instinct telling me this wasn't right. As I got closer, maybe 50 yards from passing under the overpass, the figure moved. Not walking, not jumping, just shifted position. The wings folded slightly, and it turned its head to track my truck. Direct eye contact, across 50 yards, and 20 feet of height difference, and I felt it. Recognition. It knew me, knew my name, my route, my schedule, and it wanted me to know that it knew. I hit the gas, accelerated hard, passed under that overpass doing 70 in a 55 zone. In my side mirror, I watched it launch. The wings spread wide, caught air that shouldn't have provided that much lift, and it was airborne, following me. Pacing my truck from maybe 100 feet behind and 40 feet up. I drove. Pushed my rig up to 80, dangerous on those curves, but I couldn't stop. Couldn't let that thing catch up. It followed for maybe 2 miles, and then it was just gone. Didn't land, didn't veer off, just vanished from my mirrors like it had never been there. I pulled into a truck stop outside Huntington, hands shaking so badly I could barely shift into park. Sat in my cab for 20 minutes just breathing, trying to process what I'd seen. Then I pulled out my phone and went to the forums. Posted what had happened, asked if anyone else had experienced something similar. The responses came fast, too fast. Other drivers confirming my sighting, telling me about their own experiences. And then the warnings started coming in. Private messages from users I didn't know, all saying the same thing. Get off the road. You've been marked. 48 hours. That's all you have. One message included a spreadsheet. Names, dates, sighting details, and death records. 23 drivers over the last 15 years. All had reported clear sightings of the Mothman on Route 2. All had died within 48 hours. Accidents, heart attacks. One unexplained case where a driver was found dead in his locked cab with no apparent cause. Medical examiner ruled it cardiac arrest, but the driver was 28 years old. Perfect health, no drugs or alcohol in his system. I called my dispatcher, told her I was sick, needed to abort the run. She wasn't happy, but she okayed it. I found a motel, checked in, tried to sleep, couldn't. Every sound outside was that thing landing on the roof. Every shadow was wing spreading. I lay awake until dawn, then checked out and started driving. Not toward home, not toward anywhere specific, just away. That was 43 hours ago. Since then, I've experienced 3 near accidents that shouldn't have been possible. The first happened outside Huntington. I was driving through an intersection on a green light when a car ran the red from the left. Should have T-boned me directly into the driver's door. Would have killed me instantly. But at the last second, the car's engine died. Just shut off completely, and the vehicle coasted to a stop inches from my truck. The driver, a woman in her 60s, was hysterical. Said her car had never done that before, that she'd just had it serviced. The second near miss was 6 hours later. I was getting coffee at a gas station, and the overhead canopy collapsed. Steel support beam failed. Entire structure came down right where I'd been standing 2 seconds before. I'd moved because I heard something. A sound like wings flapping, loud enough to make me turn around, and that instinctive reaction saved my life. No one else heard it. The third incident happened this morning. I was parked at a rest area trying to get a few hours of sleep in my cab. Woke up to the smell of smoke. My truck's electrical system had caught fire, flames spreading from under the dashboard. I got out with seconds to spare before the fire reached the fuel lines. The fire marshal said it was the strangest electrical fire he'd ever seen, that the wiring had been damaged in a pattern that didn't match any known failure mode, like something with claws had torn through the insulation. I've been documenting everything, taking photos, recording voice memos, keeping a log. If I don't make it, if whatever's hunting me succeeds, I want there to be a record. I want someone to know this wasn't an accident, wasn't bad luck, or mechanical failure, or medical emergency. This was something deliberate, something targeted, and it's been hunting people for decades. The pattern is clear now. The Mothman doesn't kill directly. It marks you, and then it ensures that circumstances conspire to kill you. Accidents that should have been avoided, mechanical failures that shouldn't happen, heart attacks in healthy people. It's not using claws or teeth. It's using probability, manipulating events to ensure your death while maintaining plausible deniability. And it's getting more creative. I've been checking the forums obsessively, reading accounts from other drivers. The methods vary. One driver reported that every vehicle around him started driving erratically, like they couldn't see his truck, forcing him off the road. Another said his GPS malfunctioned, sent him down a mountain road that wasn't on any map, where his brakes failed on a hairpin turn. A third driver survived a cardiac arrest and swears he saw it in the hospital room afterward, standing in the corner, wings folded, red, eyes glowing like it was confirming he'd escaped and adjusting its strategy. I'm not going to escape. I know that now. 48 hours is generous, a pattern observed but not absolute. It could come sooner. Every time I check my mirrors, I expect to see it behind me. Every overpass I drive under could be where it's waiting. Every rest stop, every gas station, every moment stopped. At a red light could be when the final accident happens. But I'm going to keep driving, keep running, because there's a slim possibility, one case in the database, of a driver who survived past the 48-hour mark. Driver named Marcus Thompson reported a sighting in 2019, documented every near miss for 3 days straight, and then nothing. No accident, no death, no follow-up posts. He just disappeared from the forums, stopped responding to messages. Either he died and no one found the connection, or he figured out something that saved him. I've been trying to contact him, left messages everywhere I could find his information, no response. But I'm heading to the last address I found, a house in Virginia. If he's alive, if he survived, I need to know how. I'm on hour 45 now, 3 hours left in the window. Traffic is getting heavier, which should make me safer, but doesn't. More vehicles means more variables, means more opportunities for accidents. I'm driving with every sense hyper alert, watching every car around me, monitoring every sound my truck makes, checking my mirrors constantly. And I see it. In the reflection of my rear mirror, there's a shadow keeping pace, wings spread wide, riding the slipstream behind my trailer. It's been there for the last 10 miles, just visible in the afternoon sun. Other drivers must see it, must have noticed this massive winged thing following a semi down the interstate. But no one's reacting. No one's swerving or slowing down or pulling over in shock. Either they don't see it, or they do see it and their brains refuse to process what they're seeing. Self-protection mechanism, cognitive dissonance, or maybe it only shows itself fully to the marked ones, to the people it's hunting. I'm documenting this, phone mounted on my dashboard, recording everything. If this is my last hour, I want proof. I want evidence that this thing exists, that it's been killing people, that the deaths aren't accidents. Someone needs to believe. The shadow is getting closer. I can see details now. The body is humanoid, but emaciated, almost skeletal. The wings are membranous, like a bat's but larger, with visible bone structure underneath. And the head has no discernible features except those eyes, still glowing red even in daylight, fixed on the back of my truck with unwavering focus. It's not trying to hide anymore. It knows the 48 hours is almost up. It knows I'm aware of what's coming, and it's done being subtle. This is the end game. My check engine light just came on. That's how it's going to happen. Some critical system failure while I'm driving 70 miles per hour in heavy traffic. Steering goes out, or brakes fail, or the engine seizes. Quick and catastrophic and explainable as mechanical failure. Another truck accident, another driver who pushed too hard, didn't maintain his vehicle properly, was tired or distracted. No one will connect it to a Mothman sighting 3 days prior, except I've left a trail. Forum posts, voice recordings, this video, and I'm sending everything to every trucker I know, every forum I'm part of, with instructions to spread it if I die. Because this needs to stop. This thing needs to be exposed, studied, stopped somehow. The engine temperature is spiking. I can smell burning oil. Whatever it did to my truck's electrical system, it's cascading now. Multiple failures happening simultaneously. I'm slowing down, trying to get to the shoulder safely, but traffic won't let me over. Cars blocking both lanes, preventing me from pulling off. Are they being controlled? Positioned deliberately? I'm on hour 47 now. Minutes left. The shadow in my mirror is directly behind me now, wings spread so wide they extend beyond both sides of my truck. Red eyes boring into my cab, and I swear I can hear it. Not a sound exactly, but something deeper. A vibration, a frequency that resonates in my chest, in my bones, that feels like inevitability. This is it. This is how it ends. But I need anyone watching this to understand. the Mothman is real. It appears before tragedies, not to warn, but to ensure. It's a harbinger that makes its own prophecies come true. And if you ever drive through Point Pleasant, West Virginia late at night, and you see something massive standing on an overpass with wings spread wide and eyes that glow red, do not stop. Do not look directly at it. Do not acknowledge it in any way. Just drive. Drive fast and far and don't look back. 'Cause if it marks you, if it decides you're next, you have 48 hours, maybe less. And every second after that, you're living on borrowed time that it will collect. My engine is failing. I can feel the power dropping. I'm losing speed, losing control. The thing behind me is closer now. So close I can feel the wind from its wings through my vents. This is the moment. This is when the accident happens. But I'm not giving up. I'm fighting for every second, every inch. Because maybe, just maybe, if I survive past hour 48, the curse breaks. Maybe Marcus Thompson figured that out. Maybe that's why he disappeared. He survived, and the Mothman lost its hold. I'm going to find out, one way or another. Hour 48. Time's up. There's a specific kind of fear that comes from serving someone who you know isn't human, but everyone else treats as normal. And that fear kept me frozen behind the counter for 6 minutes while it decided whether or not to kill me. My name is Patricia Ochoa. I work graveyard shift at a Chevron station on Highway 491 near the New Mexico-Arizona border. And 2 weeks ago, I watched something wearing a man's face walk through my door. And the worst part wasn't what it was, but that I'd seen him before, seen the real him, 3 hours earlier. I need to give you context about where I work, because location matters in this story. Highway 491 used to be called Highway 666 until 2003, when they renamed it because of all the accidents, all the deaths, all the stories. It cuts through the Navajo Nation, miles and miles of high desert, with nothing but scrub brush and red rock and darkness so complete that your headlights seem to just stop working after a certain distance. The gas station I work at is one of maybe 3 stops in a 60-mile stretch, and between midnight and 6 a.m. I'm usually alone. I'm not Navajo myself, I'm Hispanic, grew up in Albuquerque. Moved out here because rent was cheap, and I needed a fresh start after a bad divorce. The job pays okay for what it is, and most nights are quiet. Truckers, occasional tourists who didn't plan their drive well, locals who know me by name. I read, I watch shows on my phone, I restock shelves. Boring is good in my line of work. Boring keeps you safe. The man came in around 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. This was the first time, the real person. He was maybe 45, 50 years old, weathered face like he'd spent his life outdoors, wearing dusty jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. He bought cigarettes, a coffee, paid in cash. We had a brief conversation, the kind you have with strangers at gas stations. He mentioned he was heading to Farmington, had a job interview in the morning, was cutting through Navajo land to save time. Be careful out there, I told him. Automatic warning I give everyone driving these roads at night. Watch for animals crossing. Deer and elk don't show up well in headlights. He thanked me, took his coffee, and left. I watched his truck pull out of the lot, taillights disappearing down the highway heading north. Standard interaction, nothing weird, nothing memorable except for what happened later. Around 2:30 a.m. the door chimed again. I looked up from my phone and saw him. Same man, same flannel shirt, same weathered face. He walked up to the counter with that slightly stiff gait people get after long drives, and he smiled at me. Evening again, he said. I felt it immediately. Something wrong, something off. The smile was too wide, teeth showing too much. The eyes weren't blinking at the right rhythm. And the voice, while it matched, had a quality to it like he was speaking from the bottom of a well, echoes within echoes. You were here earlier, I managed. Was I? The head tilted just slightly too far to the side. Funny, I don't remember. My training, such as it was, kicked in. Stay calm, stay professional. Don't antagonize potentially dangerous customers. What can I help you with? Just looking. He started walking through the aisles, and the way he moved was wrong. The joints bent correctly, but the fluidity wasn't human. It was like watching someone who'd learned to walk by watching videos, but had never actually felt muscles and bones working together. And he was looking at everything, head swiveling with mechanical precision, examining every product like he'd never seen a gas station before. I pulled out my phone under the counter, ready to dial 911, but my hands were shaking. This wasn't a drunk customer or someone on drugs. This was something else, something my rational mind couldn't categorize, but my instincts were screaming about. He picked up a candy bar, turned it over in his hands, studied the wrapper with intense focus. "Do you eat these?" The question was asked with genuine curiosity, like a child discovering something new. "Yes, people eat those." "Interesting." He put it down, moved to the next item. A bag of chips. Same intense examination. "And these?" "Yes." This continued for several minutes. Him picking up random items, asking if people consumed them or used them. Me answering in a voice that got progressively smaller. And the whole time, something in his movements, his expressions, was learning. Adapting. The joints started bending more naturally. The head movements became less mechanical. It was watching me, studying how I reacted, and using that information to better mimic human behavior. Then he stopped in front of the beer cooler, stood there, staring at his reflection in the glass, reached up and touched his own face like he was confirming it was there, pressed fingertips into the cheeks, pulled at the skin slightly, examined how it moved. It wasn't vanity or narcissism. It was assessment, quality control. "This is a good one," he said, still looking at his reflection. "Fits well. Better than the last." My blood went cold. "The last what?" He turned to look at me, and for just a second something slipped. The face didn't track correctly with the skull underneath. It was like a mask that had shifted slightly, revealing something else beneath. Something with different bone structure, different proportions. Then it adjusted, snapped back into place, and he was just a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt again. "The last face," said casually, like he was talking about a jacket or a pair of shoes. I should have run, should have gone out the back exit, gotten in my car, driven away, and never come back. But I was frozen, every muscle locked, because part of me understood what I was seeing, but my brain refused to accept it. He approached the counter, movements now almost perfectly human. The learning curve was terrifyingly fast. "You've been kind, answered my questions. I appreciate that." He pulled out a wallet, the real man's wallet, and set bills on the counter. "For the items I touched, and for your discretion." "I don't understand." My voice barely worked. "Yes, you do." He leaned forward, close enough that I could smell him. Dirt and something else, something organic and wrong, like roadkill that had been in the sun too long. "You know what I am. Your people have stories about us, though you've tried to forget them. Moved to cities, adopted new ways. But the old things don't disappear just because you stop believing." "Skinwalker." The word came out as a whisper. The smile widened, genuine this time, or as genuine as that thing could manage. "Some call us that. We prefer other names, but yes, that's close enough." "The man you're wearing, where is he?" "Gone. I needed his form, his identity for a while. He was traveling alone, took a wrong turn onto a road that doesn't appear on maps. Made it easy." The thing paused, watching my face. "Does it bother you that he's dead?" "Yes." Tears were streaming down my face now. "Yes, it bothers me." "Interesting. You didn't know him. Spoke to him for maybe 2 minutes. Yet you grieve." It seemed genuinely puzzled by this concept. "Humans are strange. You form bonds so quickly, feel loss for people you never knew. Inefficient." "What are you going to do?" "I expected death. Expected it would kill me for seeing, for knowing, for being a witness. Instead, it picked up the money from the counter, placed it carefully in the wallet, and put the wallet back in its pocket. Nothing. You've done nothing wrong. Answered questions, showed courtesy. Why would I harm you? Because I know. Many people know. They see us and their minds create explanations. Drugs, alcohol, stress, hallucinations. They convince themselves they didn't see what they saw. You'll do the same. By morning, you'll have convinced yourself this was a dream, a delusion brought on by exhaustion. It turned toward the door, then looked back. And even if you don't, even if you remember clearly and tell people, who would believe you? It walked out, got into the dead man's truck, started the engine, and drove away. I stood behind that counter shaking for a full 10 minutes before I could move. Then I called my boss, told him I was sick, needed someone to cover the rest of my shift. He was annoyed but agreed. I went home, locked every door and window, and tried to process what I'd seen. The thing was right about one part. I could tell people, could file a police report, could share my story. But what would I say? That a shape-shifting creature came into my gas station and had a polite conversation with me before leaving. They'd think I was having a breakdown, maybe drug test me, definitely fire me for making false reports. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. I started researching, looking for missing person reports, accidents, anything involving a middle-aged man in the area around the time that thing took him. I found something. A man named Robert Whitmore, 47, from Durango, Colorado, reported missing by his wife when he didn't show up for a job interview in Farmington. Last seen at a gas station on Highway 491 around 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, the gas station where I work. His truck was found 3 days later, abandoned on a dirt road 15 miles from the highway. No signs of foul play, no blood, no struggle. He'd just vanished. The investigation went nowhere. The working theory was that he'd wandered off, maybe had a medical emergency or got disoriented. The desert can be unforgiving. People disappear out here. But I know what happened to Robert Whitmore. I know that something took him, wore him like a suit, used his identity for whatever purpose it needed. And when it was done, it discarded him somewhere out in the desert where the coyotes and ravens would take care of the evidence. And the terrifying part? The thing was right about human psychology. I've tried telling people, and they don't believe me. They think the isolation got to me, that working graveyard shifts messed with my head. My ex-husband, when I called him in a moment of weakness, suggested I see a therapist. My coworkers make jokes about me seeing ghosts. Even my manager, when I tried to explain why I needed to transfer to day shift, to work anywhere with more people and more light, looked at me with pity and concern. Patricia, honey, this job isn't for everyone. The isolation, the overnight hours, it can mess with your perception. Maybe you should take some time off, see someone. So I stopped telling people, stopped trying to make them understand, but I kept researching, kept looking for patterns, and I found them. Over the last 10 years, there have been 17 missing person cases along Highway 491. 17 people who vanished without a trace, whose vehicles were found abandoned, whose families never got closure. 17 faces that something could be wearing, 17 identities it could be using. And here's what really terrifies me. That thing said, the last face, implying there had been others before Robert Whitmore. How many? How long has it been doing this? How many of the people I interact with daily, the customers who come through that gas station, might not be human at all, but something else wearing stolen skin? I still work there. I need the money. And jobs aren't easy to come by out here. But I've taken precautions. I've learned everything I can about Navajo stories, talked to elders who were willing to share, learned about protection methods. I keep white ash in a pouch under the counter. I wear turquoise, not because I believe in its protective properties, but because it can't hurt. I've learned to recognize the signs, the tells that indicate someone isn't quite right, the subtle wrongness in movement, the too perfect mimicry that doesn't account for human imperfection. The eyes that watch too intently, learning, cataloging, adapting. I've seen it 3 more times since that night. Different forms, different faces, but the same core wrongness underneath. Each time, I serve them politely, professionally, don't react or show fear, because the thing was also right about efficiency. It doesn't kill without reason, as long as you don't threaten it. Don't interfere with whatever its purpose is. It leaves you alone. But I live with the knowledge now. Live with understanding that monsters are real, that they walk among us wearing faces they've stolen, and that most people will never know. They'll see these things, and their brains will rationalize, will find acceptable explanations, will protect them from the truth. I don't have that luxury anymore. I see them clearly now, and once you've seen, really seen, you can't unsee. You can't go back to the comfortable ignorance of believing monsters are just stories. So I work my shifts. I serve the customers, human and otherwise. I smile and make change and restock shelves. And I watch, always watching. Because out here on Highway 491, in the deep desert darkness between nowhere and nothing, the old things still walk. And they're getting better at pretending to be us. That's my story. That's what happened at the gas station 2 weeks ago. And if you're driving through Navajo land late at night and you stop for gas, and the person behind the counter seems a little too alert, a little too watchful, know that it's because we've learned to recognize what you can't see. We're the watchers now, the ones who know, and we're trying to protect you from the truth that would shatter your comfortable reality. Because, trust me, you don't want to see what we've seen. You don't want to know what's really out there in the darkness, watching back. Beauty can be the most dangerous lure in nature, which is something I understood too late, after I'd already followed that impossible white elk 3 miles off any marked trail, and realized the forest had gone completely silent around me. My name is Christine Park. I'm a wildlife photographer from Seattle, and last September I spent 6 days pursuing the perfect shot of something that I now understand was never an animal at all, but bait designed specifically for people like me who mistake obsession for passion. Photography has been my life for 12 years. I specialized in Pacific Northwest wildlife, had published work in National Geographic, Audubon, Outside Magazine. My portfolio was my pride, images captured after days or weeks of patient waiting, of understanding animal behavior, of being in the right place at the right moment. I wasn't a hobbyist with a good camera. I was a professional who respected the wilderness and the creatures I documented. That respect, that dedication is exactly what made me vulnerable. The assignment came through my agent in late August. A private collector wanted documentation of rare wildlife in Olympic National Forest, specifically focusing on unusual color variations or mutations. Albino deer, melanistic bears, anything that deviated from normal phenotype expression. The pay was exceptional, enough to fund my work for the next year, and the timeline was flexible. 2 weeks, shoot what I could find, deliver the images. Simple. I went in prepared. Top-end camera equipment, backup bodies and lenses, camping gear rated for Pacific Northwest weather, GPS with downloaded topographical maps, satellite communicator for emergencies. I'd filed my itinerary with the Park Service, had check-in protocols established, everything by the book, everything professional. The first 3 days were standard wildlife photography. I documented a black bear with cubs, got some excellent shots of Roosevelt elk during the rut, captured a family of river otters. Good work, marketable images, but nothing exceptional. Nothing that justified the premium the collector was paying. Day 4, I saw it for the first time. I was hiking through old-growth forest, maybe 8 miles from the nearest trailhead, when movement caught my eye. A flash of white through the trees, too large to be a deer, moving with a grace that seemed almost choreographed. I froze, slowly brought my camera up, and got my first look through the telephoto lens. A white elk. Not albino. The coloration was wrong for that. Pure white coat, but with normal dark eyes and black hooves. The antlers were massive, perfectly symmetrical, more points than I could count quickly. It stood in a shaft of sunlight breaking through the canopy, and the effect was ethereal, almost supernatural. It was the most beautiful animal I'd ever seen. I took the shot. Actually, I took about 40 shots in rapid succession, different exposures, and focal lengths, professional instinct taking over. The elk didn't spook, didn't react to the camera shutter sound at all. It just stood there, looking directly at me, and I swear there was intelligence in those eyes. Awareness beyond what you'd expect from a wild animal. Then it turned and walked away, moving with that same fluid grace, and without thinking, I followed. Professional opportunity overriding caution. This was the shot, the image that would define my career. A white elk in Olympic rainforest, documented by a credible photographer with professional equipment. This was worth following. I tracked it for maybe 20 minutes, staying far enough back not to spook it, close enough to keep it in sight. It moved through the forest like it knew exactly where it was going, choosing paths that were just clear enough for me to follow, but difficult enough that I had to focus on my footing. Several times, I almost lost sight of it, and each time it would stop, turn back to look at me, wait until I caught up before continuing. It was leading me. I understood that even then, but I rationalized it. Elk sometimes tolerate human presence, I told myself. This one had probably been photographed before, was habituated to people. The fact that it was white suggested it might have been raised in captivity and released, might have imprinted on humans. All reasonable explanations that I used to justify continuing to follow. When it finally stopped, we were in a clearing I'd never seen before, not marked on any of my maps. The area was perfectly circular, maybe 50 feet across, with the forest forming walls around it. The canopy above was open, allowing full sunlight to pour down, and in that light, the white elk looked even more spectacular, coat almost luminescent. I spent an hour photographing it, got images from every angle, in different light conditions as the sun moved. The elk posed, there's no other word for it, turned to show its profile, lowered its head to display the antlers, stood in positions that were perfect for compositional balance. It was too perfect, too cooperative, but I was so focused on getting the shots that I didn't question it enough. When I finally lowered my camera, satisfied I had everything I needed, I noticed the forest had gone silent. No bird calls, no insect sounds, no wind rustling the leaves. Complete absence of noise, like the world was holding its breath. And the elk was staring at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I backed away slowly, thanked it out loud like an idiot, some babbled expression of gratitude for its cooperation. It didn't move, just watched me with those two intelligent eyes. I turned to leave the clearing, to retrace my steps back to the trail. Except there were no steps to retrace. The path I'd taken into the clearing was gone, replaced by dense undergrowth and fallen logs that would have been impossible to cross. I turned in a circle, looking for any break in the forest wall, any indication of how I'd entered. Nothing. The clearing was surrounded by impenetrable forest. I looked back at the elk. It was still staring at me, and as I watched, it did something no elk should be able to do. It smiled. Not a human expression projected onto an animal face, but an actual smile. Lips pulling back to reveal teeth that were too sharp, too numerous, arranged in rows that went back impossibly far into its throat. I ran, chose a direction at random, and crashed through the undergrowth, branches tearing at my clothes and skin, not caring about the noise or the damage to my equipment. Just needed to get away from that thing, from that smile, from the wrongness of what I'd just seen. I ran until I couldn't breathe, until my legs gave out, and I collapsed against a moss-covered log. When I could think again, when panic receded enough for rational thought, I checked my GPS. The screen showed my location as a blue dot in a blank area. No topographical features, no trail markers. I was off the map, in a section of forest that according to the device shouldn't exist. The satellite communicator had no signal. My phone was dead despite being fully charged when I'd entered the forest. All my electronics were failing simultaneously, which was impossible but happening anyway. I tried to orient myself using the sun, basic wilderness navigation, but the sun was in the wrong position, too high for the time of day, and when I checked my watch, the hands were spinning backward. Time wasn't working correctly. Space wasn't working correctly. I was somewhere that operated by different rules. That's when I heard it. A sound like antlers scraping against bark, coming from multiple directions at once. I looked around and saw them, white shapes moving through the trees, circling me. Not just one elk now, but many. Dozens. All white, all with those two perfect antlers, all moving with that same choreographed grace. They were herding me. Every time I tried to move in one direction, they'd close in, force me back, push me in a specific direction. I was being driven deeper into the forest, further from anything I recognized, and I understood with horrible clarity that this had all been planned. The initial sighting, the cooperative posing, the lure of the perfect photograph. All of it designed to get me here, to this place, for some purpose I didn't understand. I fought. Tried to break through their circle, tried to force my way past them. But every time I got close to one, it would change. The elk form would ripple, distort, and I'd catch glimpses of what was underneath. Something tall and thin with too many joints, with antlers that weren't antlers, but appendages with their own articulation. The white coat wasn't fur, but something else. Something that moved independently of wind or the creature's movement. They drove me for hours. I lost track of time, lost any sense of direction. The forest around me changed, trees becoming larger, older, species I didn't recognize. The light took on a quality that wasn't quite natural, filtering through a canopy that seemed to be moving even when there was no wind. Eventually, I collapsed. Couldn't run anymore, couldn't walk. I sat down in the middle of what looked like a game trail and waited for whatever was going to happen. The white shapes circled closer, tightening their formation, and I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, I was on a marked trail 3 miles from the nearest parking area. It was dawn. My equipment was arranged neatly beside me, camera and lenses clean and organized. My watch showed it was September 23rd. I'd been missing for 6 days. The park rangers found me shortly after I started walking. They'd been searching, had a whole operation coordinated. My agent had reported me missing when I didn't check in, and they'd been combing the forest for days. They asked what happened, where I'd been, if I'd been injured or assaulted. I told them I'd gotten lost, that I didn't remember clearly, that I must have hit my head or become disoriented. They accepted it, chalked it up to exposure, to mild hypothermia, to the disorientation that can happen when people spend too long alone in the wilderness. They were relieved to find me alive and relatively unharmed. I had some scratches, some bruising, signs of having spent time outdoors, but nothing that required hospitalization. When I got home, when I was alone in my apartment with my equipment, I checked the memory cards. 40 shots of the white elk from that first day were there, exactly as I'd taken them. But there were also images I didn't remember taking. Hundreds of them, all time-stamped over those missing 6 days. Photos of the forest from angles that should have been impossible. Images taken from 30 feet up with no visible means of elevation. Shots of creatures that looked almost but not quite like known animals. Familiar forms with wrong details. And pictures of me, asleep or unconscious, surrounded by white shapes that the camera had captured more clearly than my eyes had seen them. Things with bodies that were part elk, part something else entirely. Limbs that bent in too many places. Faces that were trying to look like elk but had the features arranged wrong. And in every image, they were touching me. Antlers pressed against my forehead. hooved feet positioned around my body in patterns that looked almost ritualistic. The final image was the worst. It was a selfie, taken with my camera on timer, but I wasn't the one who'd set it up. The composition showed me unconscious in the center, surrounded by a circle of the white creatures. And standing behind me, hands on my shoulders, in a possessive gesture, was something that towered over everything else. It was vaguely humanoid, but stretched, elongated, with a skull that might have once been cervine but had evolved into something else. The white elk, in its true form, showing me what had really been leading me through the forest. I deleted everything, formatted the cards multiple times, destroyed them physically, threw them away in different dumpsters across the city. But I'd seen the images. I couldn't unsee them. And I knew what had happened, even if I couldn't remember it clearly. I'd been taken, studied. Whatever those things were, they'd been examining me, learning from me. The images showed them mimicking my poses, copying the way I held my camera, the way I moved through the forest. They'd been using me to learn how to better impersonate what they hunted. I haven't gone back to Olympic National Forest. Haven't taken any wilderness photography assignments since. My agent thinks I'm having a creative crisis, that I lost my nerve after getting lost. Other photographers have asked what happened, whether I got any usable shots before things went wrong. I tell them no. Tell them the memory cards were corrupted, that I lost everything. But sometimes I see my work published anyway. Images I didn't take, credited to me, showing up in magazines and websites. Photographs of Olympic National Forest that match my style perfectly, but that I have no memory of capturing. And in some of them, if you look carefully at the shadows, at the spaces between trees, you can see shapes. White shapes watching, learning, waiting. Other photographers have started reporting sightings. A white elk in the Olympic rainforest, remarkably tolerant of human presence. Perfect, photographic subject. Some of them have gotten excellent shots, career-defining images. Some of them have disappeared for days, returned with no clear memory of where they were. And the ones who check their memory cards find the same thing I did. Extra images they don't remember taking, showing them surrounded by things that wear beauty like a mask. I've tried warning people, posted in photography forums about the dangers of following wildlife too deep into unmarked areas. But I can't tell them the real truth. Can't explain that some animals aren't animals at all, but lures designed by something ancient that has learned to exploit human obsession. They'd think I was crazy, that the experience traumatized me into paranoid delusions. So I stopped photographing wildlife, switched to urban photography, architecture, street scenes. Anything that keeps me in cities, away from forests, away from the possibility of seeing something beautiful enough to make me forget caution. Because I know now that's what they are. Predators that have evolved to understand human psychology, to recognize what drives us, what makes us vulnerable, and they use our passions against us. For me, it was photography, the pursuit of the perfect image. For someone else, it might be different, but they'll find it, whatever it is, and they'll use it to lead you exactly where they want you to go. And once you're there, in that space between the normal forest and whatever exists underneath, you belong to them. They study you, learn from you, and if you're lucky, they let you go. If you're not lucky, you become one of the people who never comes back, just another missing hiker statistic in a forest that takes dozens every year. I was lucky. I got to leave. But part of me stayed there, in that impossible clearing with those white shapes circling. And sometimes, late at night, I dream about it. Dream about that perfect elk, that perfect photograph. And in the dream, I never stop following. I just keep walking deeper and deeper into the forest, chasing beauty that was never meant for human eyes, until I disappear completely into something that has been waiting for someone like me for longer than I can comprehend. Every rational explanation I came up with lasted exactly as long as it took for them to appear again. And by the time I realized they were getting closer to my house with each visit, I'd already documented 73 separate sightings in just 11 days. My name is Michael Santos. I'm a software engineer working from home in Fresno, California. And what started as a curiosity captured on my security cameras has become an escalating pattern that suggests something small, white, and impossible is very deliberately approaching my back door. I should start by explaining that I'm not someone who believes in cryptids or paranormal phenomena. I'm a programmer. I deal in logic and code and systems that follow predictable rules. My house is equipped with smart home technology because I enjoy the integration challenge, not because I'm paranoid. Motion-activated cameras, automated lighting, environmental sensors, all networked and logging data to my home server. It's a hobby, a practical application of my professional skills. The first recording happened on June 3rd at 2:17 a.m. One of my backyard cameras picked up movement near the fence line. I reviewed the footage the next morning as part of my routine check, expecting to see a cat or possum. Instead, I saw something I initially thought was a glitch in the video processing. Two small figures, maybe 3 feet tall, moving across my lawn. But they weren't walking in any conventional sense. They appeared to be just legs, white stick-like appendages moving in a gliding motion with no visible upper body. No torso, no arms, no head that I could clearly identify. Just legs with what might have been a small mass at the top, but the resolution wasn't good enough to tell. My first assumption was a rendering error, compression artifacts creating false imagery. I checked the raw data, verified the file integrity, even examined the camera itself for defects. Everything checked out. The recording was genuine, unaltered, showing exactly what the camera had captured. I posted the video to a few tech forums asking if anyone had seen similar false positives from this camera model. The responses were mixed. Some people agreed it looked like a technical glitch. Others pointed me toward cryptozoology sites, told me I'd captured Fresno nightcrawlers, some kind of local legend about small white beings that appear on security cameras in the Fresno area. I dismissed the cryptid angle immediately. Urban legend, internet folklore, not worth serious consideration. I ordered a higher resolution camera to replace the one that had captured the footage, figuring better equipment would solve the problem. The new camera arrived 3 days later. I installed it the same day. 4K resolution, better low-light performance, more sophisticated motion detection. That night, at 2:43 a.m., it captured them again, and this time, the detail was unmistakable. They were real, not glitches, not artifacts, but actual entities moving through my yard. The higher resolution showed texture on the white surface, showed the way the leg-like structures bent at joints, showed shadows cast correctly by my landscape lighting. They moved in a peculiar rhythm, almost hypnotic, gliding from the back fence toward my house, getting about halfway across the lawn before disappearing from frame. I watched that footage dozens of times, analyzing every aspect. They cast shadows. They displaced grass as they moved. When they passed in front of my shed, the structure blocked them appropriately. Everything about the recording suggested these were physical objects in real space, not digital anomalies. I did what any engineer would do. I gathered more data, set up additional cameras, positioned them to cover every angle of my yard, added infrared and thermal imaging capabilities. If these things were real, I would document them thoroughly, gather enough information to determine what they actually were. Over the next week, they appeared 6 more times, always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., always entering from the back fence, always moving toward my house before disappearing. And with each appearance, they came slightly closer. The first night, they'd stayed near the fence line. By the 8th appearance, they were reaching my patio. The thermal imaging was particularly interesting. They registered a temperature slightly cooler than ambient, maybe 5 degrees lower than the surrounding air. Not cold enough to suggest they were purely supernatural, but weird enough that I couldn't explain it with conventional biology. I started measuring their approach pattern, plotted their positions over time, created visualizations showing their progression. The data revealed something disturbing. They were moving in a deliberate pattern, testing different routes, but consistently advancing toward my back door. The movement wasn't random exploration. It was systematic reconnaissance. By appearance 15, I was seriously concerned. They'd reached my patio, were moving along the perimeter of my house, pausing at windows and doors like they were examining them. One camera caught what looked like one of them reaching up toward a window, the leg structure extending higher than should have been possible, touching the glass with something at its top that I couldn't quite resolve into a recognizable form. I called the police, showed them the footage, explained I had trespassers on my property that I couldn't identify. The responding officer watched the videos, looked at me with barely concealed skepticism, suggested they might be some kind of local wildlife I wasn't familiar with. When I insisted that no known wildlife looked like that, moved like that, he recommended I contact animal control. Animal control was even less helpful. They watched the footage, couldn't identify the species, suggested I might have captured something that was partly obscured by camera angle, that what looked like just legs might actually be a complete animal. Wasn't seeing clearly. They offered to set traps if I wanted, but they were clearly humoring me more than taking it seriously. So I continued documenting alone, set up more cameras, added acoustic sensors to capture sound, installed motion-activated lights that would flood the yard with illumination when anything was detected. I was creating a comprehensive surveillance system, determined to get concrete proof of what these things were. Appearance 23 was when things changed. The lights triggered at 2:31 a.m., flooding the yard with brightness. I pulled up the live camera feeds immediately, watched in real time as not 2 but 7 of the entities scattered across my lawn. They didn't flee when the lights came on. They stopped, turned toward the house, toward the cameras, and stood perfectly still. For the first time, I got a clear view of what topped those leg structures. Small masses, difficult to describe, that might have been heads or might have been something else entirely. They had no discernible features, no eyes or mouths that I could identify, but they were oriented toward my house. Oriented toward me, I realized, because I was standing at my back window watching them. They stood there for 47 seconds, according to the timestamp. Then, in perfect synchronization, they all turned and glided back toward the fence, disappearing into the darkness beyond my property line. The coordination was eerie, suggested communication or hive mind behavior that made them far more sophisticated than simple animals. I called in sick to work the next day, spent 16 hours reviewing footage, analyzing patterns, trying to find some logical explanation. The data kept pointing to the same conclusion. These were intelligent entities engaged in purposeful behavior, and their purpose involved my house. Appearance 31 introduced a new element. They brought something with them. One of the entities was carrying an object, a small white thing held somehow by its leg structure. It placed this object in the center of my yard, and they all gathered around it in a circle. They stood there for several minutes, moving slightly in what might have been a ritualistic pattern, then departed, leaving the object behind. At dawn, I went out to examine it. The object was roughly spherical, about the size of a tennis ball, made of some white material that felt organic, but not like any biological substance I recognized. It was slightly warm to the touch, and when I picked it up, it pulsed faintly, a rhythmic vibration that felt disturbingly like a heartbeat. I brought it inside, photographed it extensively, took samples for analysis. Under magnification, the surface showed microscopic structures that looked almost cellular, but with geometry that was wrong, crystalline formations that shouldn't exist in organic material. I sent samples to a lab, claiming they were from an unknown plant species I'd found, requesting full analysis. The entities continued, appearing. By appearance, 50, they were testing my doors and windows every night. The acoustic sensors picked up sounds when they touched surfaces, high-frequency clicking that was just barely within human hearing range. When I analyzed the audio, the clicking had patterns, rhythmic structures that suggested language or communication. Appearance 62 was when they first attempted entry. One of them managed to partially phase through my back door. The camera footage showed it clearly, the entity pressing against the door, its white form beginning to pass through the solid wood, like it wasn't entirely physical. The door's lock started glowing faintly, heating up according to the thermal camera, and then the entity withdrew. Whether it was the lock itself that prevented entry or some other factor, I couldn't determine. I reinforced every entry point after that, added physical barriers, installed salt lines per internet folklore about protecting against supernatural entities, set up electromagnetic field generators based on paranormal investigation guides. I threw out rational skepticism and started using every protective measure I could find, regardless of how pseudoscientific it seemed. The lab results came back on day 10. The sample I'd sent them was categorized as unknown biological origin, with notes indicating the cellular structures were unlike anything in their reference databases. The crystalline formations suggested mineral content that shouldn't exist in living tissue. The report recommended I contact the CDC if I had more samples, as this might represent an unknown organism with potential biohazard implications. Appearance 70 was when I realized I couldn't stay. There were now dozens of them appearing each night. My yard was filled with white leg structures moving in coordinated patterns, creating geometric formations, performing what looked increasingly like some kind of ceremony or ritual, and they were all oriented toward my house, toward me specifically. I'd stopped sleeping, spent every night monitoring cameras, watching them gather, documenting their increasing numbers. My work suffered, my boss expressing concern about my recent performance issues. Friends and family were worried about my appearance, suggesting I looked exhausted and stressed. I tried showing them the footage. My brother watched, suggested it looked like some kind of optical illusion or camera malfunction. My coworker thought I was pulling an elaborate prank. My mother, bless her, was genuinely concerned but clearly thought I was having some kind of mental health crisis. No one believed me. Even with dozens of hours of high-quality footage, even with thermal and acoustic data, even with physical samples, people found ways to rationalize what they were seeing or simply dismissed it as fake. The human mind, I learned, is incredibly resistant to accepting something that contradicts established understanding of reality. On day 11, appearances 73, they reached my back door. All of them, maybe 30 or 40 entities, gathered at my door in complete silence. The acoustic sensors picked up nothing except that high-frequency clicking, now synchronized among all of them, creating a resonance that made my windows vibrate. I watched through the camera feeds, too terrified to look directly. They stood there for 10 minutes, just standing, their featureless tops all oriented toward the door. Then one of them reached up, touched the door handle, and the lock clicked open. I'd locked that door, triple-checked it. But it opened anyway, swinging inward slowly while I stood in my living room, watching the security feed and the actual door simultaneously. The entities didn't enter. They just stood at the threshold, waiting. I ran, grabbed my laptop with all the data, my car keys, and drove to a hotel. Called a real estate agent the next morning, put the house on the market immediately, priced it to sell fast. Took a loss I could barely afford, but staying wasn't an option. The house sold in 4 days. I never went back inside. Hired movers to pack my things. Supervised from my car in the driveway, left before sunset. The new owners were a young couple, excited about their first home, asking about the neighborhood and schools. I wanted to warn them, wanted to show them the footage, but what would I say? That small white leg creatures appear in the yard and try to enter the house. They'd think I was insane, might back out of the sale, and I needed out. I drive past sometimes. The house looks normal, lights on in the evening, cars in the driveway, but I still have access to the security system remotely, kept the login credentials. Late at night, when I can't sleep, I pull up the camera feeds. They're still there, still appearing between 2 and 4 a.m., still gathering in the yard. But they're not approaching the house anymore. They're just there, in that yard, maintaining presence, waiting for something. Maybe waiting for those new owners to notice them. Maybe waiting for them to open that door the way it opened for me. I've tried warning the couple. Sent an anonymous email with some of the footage, but it went unanswered. Called once, tried to explain, got told to stop harassing them, or they'd contact the police. They don't want to know. Don't want to believe. So I just watch the feed sometimes. Watch those white figures gathering in what used to be my yard. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd let them enter, if I'd found out what they actually wanted. Part of me thinks I made a mistake by running, that I passed up an opportunity to document something genuinely unknown. The rest of me knows I'd be dead or worse if I'd stayed. That's what living in Fresno taught me, that there are things appearing in our backyards, being captured on our cameras, approaching our homes, and we collectively choose not to see them. We rationalize, we dismiss, we convince ourselves it's fake, or glitched, or explained, because accepting the truth means accepting that our homes aren't safe, that our cameras sometimes capture things that shouldn't exist, and that sometimes those things want to come inside. The Fresno nightcrawlers are real. They're documented across hundreds of security cameras in this city. And if they're appearing in your yard, getting closer every night, gathering in greater numbers, you have two choices. Run like I did, or find out what happens when you let them in. I chose to run. I don't know if that was the right choice, but I'm still alive to document what I saw, to warn others, to provide evidence that something impossible is happening in suburban California. Whether anyone believes me is another matter entirely. The classified files I found weren't supposed to exist, and the moment I realized the experiment logs matched the creature I'd been watching on the security monitors for 3 consecutive nights, I understood why my supervisor had warned me never to enter Building 7 alone after dark. My name is James Kowalski. I'm a security contractor for the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center in Maryland, and what I discovered in a locked filing cabinet suggests the local Goatman legend isn't folklore at all, but a failed government experiment that's been hunting on this property for over 40 years. I need to establish my credibility before I tell you what happened. I'm former military police, 12 years in the Army before transitioning to civilian security work. I've done protection details for government facilities, corporate campuses, research installations. I'm trained to observe, document, and respond to threats with measured professionalism. I don't panic, I don't imagine things, and I don't believe in monsters, or at least I didn't until 3 weeks ago. The Beltsville Agricultural Research Center is a sprawling government facility, over 6,500 acres of research farms, laboratories, and administrative buildings run by the USDA. Most of it is mundane agricultural science, crop testing, livestock studies, soil analysis, but there are sections of the property that are restricted, buildings that require additional clearance, areas where my security patrols are specifically told not to go without explicit authorization. I've worked there for 8 months. Night shift security, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 4 nights a week. My route covers about 30 buildings, checking doors, monitoring alarm systems, investigating any anomalies. It's usually quiet, occasionally a researcher working late, sometimes wildlife wandering too close to the buildings. Standard security work, nothing exciting, which is exactly why I took the job. After military deployments, I wanted boring. Building 7 has always been strange. It's an old research facility from the 1970s. Mostly unused now, scheduled for demolition next year according to the plans I'd seen. My instructions regarding Building 7 were explicit. Exterior patrol only. Check doors and windows from outside. Do not enter unless there's clear evidence of break-in or fire. No explanation given for the restriction, just direct orders from my supervisor. 3 weeks ago, Tuesday night, I was doing my standard patrol around Building 7 when I noticed one of the ground floor windows was broken. Not shattered, but definitely cracked, like something had impacted it from inside. That qualified as an anomaly worth investigating, so I radioed it in, got authorization to enter and assess. The interior of Building 7 was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned research facility. Empty labs with outdated equipment, offices with furniture still in place, hallways lined with filing cabinets that nobody had bothered to clear out. Everything covered in dust, that musty smell of a building that's been closed up for years. I documented the broken window, found no signs of intruders, determined it was probably structural stress causing the crack. I was about to leave when I noticed a door at the end of the main hallway. Heavy steel, the kind you see on secure storage areas, with a combination lock and a faded sign reading, "Authorized personnel only, level 4 clearance required." It was slightly ajar, which was wrong because those doors are designed to close automatically and lock. I should have left it alone, should have reported it and let someone with proper clearance deal with it. But curiosity and professional obligation combined into a decision I now regret. I pushed the door open and entered. The room beyond was an archive, floor-to-ceiling filing cabinets lining every wall. But unlike the rest of Building 7, this room was climate-controlled, the air cool and dry, suggesting the system was still active. Someone was maintaining this space, keeping these files preserved. I pulled open the nearest cabinet, found manila folders labeled with project names and dates. Most were agricultural studies, exactly what you'd expect. But one drawer had files marked with red borders and stamped "Classified Destroy after 50 years." The dates on those files were from 1971 to 1983. They should have been destroyed years ago, but here they were, preserved in a locked room in an abandoned building. I photographed several of the labels with my phone, professional documentation of an anomaly, then opened one to see what was inside. Project Chimera. That was the heading on the first document. The summary described genetic manipulation experiments combining human and animal DNA, attempting to create enhanced soldiers with animal attributes, strength of bears, speed of wolves, sensory capabilities of predators. It read like science fiction, like something from a bad movie, except the documentation was exhaustive, detailed, official. Progress reports, test results, photographs. The photographs were horrifying, images of creatures that were part human, part various animals, in different stages of development or failure. Most had died, according to the notes. The genetic combinations were unstable, the subjects experiencing rapid physical deterioration. But one project had produced a viable result. Subject 17, labeled Caprine Integration Success. The photographs of Subject 17 showed a human male who had been altered to incorporate goat DNA. The progression was documented over months. Early images showed minor changes, slight alterations to bone structure. Later images showed something that was barely recognizable as human. Elongated skull with caprine features, body structure modified to support digitigrade legs ending in hooves, hands that had fused into something between fingers and hooves. And the final image, dated December 1982, showed the creature fully transformed, standing upright, holding what the caption identified as a fire axe taken from the facility during a containment breach. The last entry in the file was dated January 1983. It stated that Subject 17 had escaped into the surrounding forest, that recovery attempts had failed, that the project was being terminated, and all documentation was to be destroyed. There was a handwritten note at the bottom. Subject shows high intelligence and problem-solving capability. Recommend permanent monitoring of surrounding area. Do not engage. I stood in that archive for maybe 20 minutes, reading through files, photographing documents, my hands shaking as I processed what I was seeing. This was real. The government had created something in this facility, had lost control of it, and rather than tell anyone, they'd classified everything and hoped it would die or disappear. The Goatman legend made sudden, terrible sense. For decades, people around Beltsville had reported seeing a humanoid creature with a goat's head, carrying an axe, appearing near the research center and in surrounding woods. The stories were dismissed as urban legend, teenagers scaring each other, misidentified wildlife. But it wasn't folklore. It was Subject 17, still alive, still in the area, transformed into something that could survive in the wild indefinitely. I left the archive, secured the door as best I could, and finished my patrol in a daze. Didn't tell anyone what I'd found, needed time to process, to decide what to do with this information. Went home that morning, couldn't sleep, spent hours looking at the photos I'd taken, reading about genetic manipulation experiments from the Cold War era, confirming that programs like this had actually existed. The next night, Wednesday, I saw it. I was patrolling the perimeter of Building 7 around 2 a.m. when movement caught my eye near the tree line, maybe 50 yards from the building. I turned my flashlight toward it and saw something that matched the photographs exactly. Upright posture, approximately 7 feet tall, body structure that was human but modified, and the head was distinctly caprine, goat skull structure with curved horns that extended back from the crown. And it was holding something, a long-handled implement that even from that distance I recognized as an axe. We stared at each other for several seconds. It didn't flee, didn't charge, just stood there watching me with eyes that caught my flashlight and reflected it back with an unnatural gleam. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, movement smooth and deliberate, completely comfortable in a body that shouldn't exist. I reported the sighting, told my supervisor I'd seen a large animal near Building 7, possibly a deer or bear, acting strangely. He listened, made notes, and then very carefully asked if I'd entered Building 7 during my patrol. When I confirmed I had, investigating the broken window, his expression changed. Did you see anything unusual inside? The way he asked suggested he knew exactly what was in that building. Old research equipment, empty offices, nothing unusual. I lied, some instinct telling me that admitting I'd found the classified files would be a very bad idea. He relaxed slightly. Good. Building 7 is scheduled for demolition. Asbestos contamination, structural issues. That's why we don't go inside. The broken window is probably just the building deteriorating. I'll have it boarded up tomorrow. But his explanation didn't match reality. The building wasn't contaminated or deteriorating beyond normal aging, and the archive room was climate-controlled, actively maintained. Someone was preserving those files, keeping that information secured for some reason. Thursday night, it came closer. I was doing my rounds at midnight when the motion sensors around Building 7 triggered. I responded immediately, found it standing at the main entrance, one hand on the door handle, not trying to break in, just standing there, like it was contemplating entering. When I approached, calling out standard security protocol warnings, it turned to face me. Up close, the transformation was even more disturbing. The body maintained human proportions but altered, muscles restructured for different movement mechanics. The arms were longer, stronger, ending in hands that had partially fused, leaving 3-fingered appendages with thick nails that were almost hooves. And the head was fully caprine, complete goat skull structure, grafted onto a human neck, covered in sparse fur, with those curving horns that looked like they could gore through steel. It was carrying the axe. Fire axe, standard issue from the 1980s, exactly like the one in the photographs. The blade was worn, had clearly seen use over decades, and the way it held the weapon suggested familiarity, comfort, like it was an extension of its body. Subject 17. I said it without thinking. recognition overriding caution. The creature's head tilted, response clearly indicating it understood. Its mouth opened. Not a human mouth anymore, but something that combined human dental structure with ruminant features. And it made a sound. Not an animal bleat or human speech, but something between them. A vocalization that might have been an attempt at words, but came out distorted by vocal cords that had been altered beyond their original function. It raised the axe, not threateningly, but in what looked like a gesture, pointing first at the axe, then at Building 7, then at me. It was trying to communicate, I realized, trying to convey something about its origin, about what had been done to it in that building. "I found the files," I said, knowing this was insane, that I was having a conversation with something that shouldn't exist. "I know what they did to you. Project Chimera. The genetic experiments." It nodded. A distinctly human gesture performed by a distinctly inhuman head. Then it pointed at Building 7 again, made a gesture that seemed to indicate I should go inside, should see something. But before I could respond, my radio crackled with my supervisor's voice, asking for my location. I turned to respond, and when I looked back, the creature was gone. Vanished into the darkness like it had never been there, leaving only hoof prints in the soft earth, and the lingering smell of something animal and wrong. I didn't report the full encounter. Told my supervisor I'd investigated the motion sensor alert, found nothing, probably just a deer. But I started researching everything I could find about Building 7, about classified programs at Beltsville, about genetic experiments from the Cold War era. What I discovered was fragmentary, mostly redacted documents obtained through FOIA requests by conspiracy theorists and investigative journalists. References to agricultural bioengineering programs at Beltsville in the 1970s, unexplained budget allocations, personnel records for scientists with backgrounds in genetics and animal husbandry, and incident reports from the early 1980s describing a containment breach that was never fully explained, followed by immediate termination of several research programs. Subject 17 had been human once. The files I'd photographed included personnel records. Thomas Whitmore, age 23 in 1971, Army volunteer for Special Research Program, signed consent forms that he almost certainly didn't understand, authorizing genetic manipulation that would destroy his humanity. The experiment had been successful by the project's metrics, created a viable human-animal hybrid with enhanced strength and survival capabilities, but they hadn't considered what it would be like for the human consciousness trapped in that altered body. Friday night, I made a decision. I went back to Building 7, back to the archive, with a duffel bag and a plan to document everything. I photographed every file in that red-bordered drawer, hundreds of pages of classified documentation, evidence of human experimentation, of genetic manipulation, of a cover-up that had lasted over 40 years. And I waited. Sat in that archive room with the door open, flashlight off, until I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy footsteps, the distinctive clip of hooves on tile flooring. It entered the archive room, silhouetted against the dim emergency lighting from the hallway, and stood in the doorway, looking at me. "You keep coming back here," I said quietly, "to Building 7. "Why?" It moved to one of the filing cabinets, pulled open a drawer with surprising dexterity given its modified hands, and removed a file. Brought it to me, set it down carefully. The label read, Subject 17, Thomas Whitmore, Termination Procedures. I opened the file, read by flashlight. The documents inside detailed a plan, developed in 1983, to hunt and kill Subject 17 after it escaped. The plan was never executed, marked as postponed pending review, and eventually abandoned. But the final page was a medical assessment, stating that based on the genetic modifications, Subject 17 would likely survive for a normal human lifespan, possibly longer, with enhanced healing capabilities and resistance to disease. "You're stuck," I said, understanding dawning. "You're going to live like this for decades more, maybe another 40 years, and you can't die, can't reverse it, can't go back to being human." It nodded slowly. Then it pointed at the file I was holding, at the termination procedures, and made a gesture I interpreted as a question or request. "You want me to help you? To end this?" Another nod, and I saw something in its posture, something that transcended its inhuman appearance, desperation, exhaustion, decades of isolation and transformation and existence as something that was neither animal nor human, but trapped in between. I don't know what I would have decided. Don't know if I could have helped it, or if doing so would have made me complicit in something terrible. Because before I could respond, my supervisor appeared in the archive doorway with 3 other security personnel, all armed. "Step away from it, Kowalski." His voice was calm, professional. "Slowly. Don't make sudden movements." "It's not dangerous," I said, though I had no way of knowing if that was true. "It's trying to communicate. It's asking for help. That thing killed 2 researchers in 1982 when it escaped, tore them apart with its bare hands and that axe. It's dangerous, and you've contaminated a classified area. Step away, now." I looked at the creature, at Subject 17, at Thomas Whitmore, who'd volunteered for something he couldn't have understood, and paid a price no one should pay. It looked back at me, and I saw resignation in its posture. It had tried to ask for help, had reached out one more time, and once again been met with fear and containment. It ran, moved faster than should have been possible, charged past my supervisor and his team, and disappeared into the facility. They pursued, calling for backup, leaving me alone in that archive with the files scattered around me and the documentation I'd photographed stored on my phone. I was fired the next day, terminated for unauthorized access to restricted areas, for contaminating a classified space, for failure to follow security protocols. They confiscated my phone, made me sign non-disclosure agreements with threats of federal prosecution if I violated them, and escorted me off the property. But they didn't know about the backup, didn't know I'd uploaded everything to cloud storage before they took my phone, didn't know I'd made copies of the most damning files, evidence of human experimentation and cover-up that had lasted 4 decades. I'm releasing it now, all of it. The files, the photographs, my testimony. I'm breaking the NDA, risking prosecution, because people deserve to know the truth. The Goatman of Beltsville is real. It was created by government. Scientists in an illegal experiment has been surviving in the woods around that facility for over 40 years, and everyone who knows about it has chosen to keep silent rather than admit what was done. Thomas Whitmore was 23 when they transformed him. He'd be 67 now, if the aging process works normally in his altered body. 42 years of existence as something that terrifies everyone who sees it. Unable to return to society, unable to die, unable to be anything except a legend that people tell to scare each other. I don't know where he is now. Don't know if he's still on that property, still circling Building 7 hoping someone will help him, or if he's moved deeper into the Maryland forest to live out however many decades he has left in isolation. But I know he's out there. And I know that if you see something in the woods around Beltsville, something upright with a goat's head carrying an axe, you're not seeing a legend or a monster. You're seeing the victim of an experiment that should never have happened. A human being who volunteered to serve his country and was transformed into something that society refuses to acknowledge exists. That's the truth about the Goatman. Not a cryptid, not folklore, but a government creation that's been hunting for help, not prey, for over 40 years. And everyone who could have helped chose instead to keep the secret, to preserve the cover-up, to let Thomas Whitmore suffer alone rather than admit what was done to him. I've told you the truth. What you do with it is your choice. If you've made it this far through these 11 disturbing encounters, You're part of the Haunted Fears horror family now. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're warnings about what's really out there in the darkness, in the forests, in the places we think we're safe. If you want more true cryptid encounters, more unexplained phenomena, more evidence that monsters are real and living among us, subscribe to Haunted Fears. Hit that notification bell, because every week we bring you stories that the authorities don't want you to hear, encounters that defy explanation, and truths that will change how you see the world around you. Stay safe out there, horror family. And remember, just because something sounds impossible doesn't mean it isn't real.